There she was, my son's wife, milking cows in darkness at 4:30 in the morning. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion. Her clothes were filthy. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. This wasn't her farm. She didn't own a single acre. She wasn't getting paid a single dollar. I stood there in the shadows watching Meadow work herself to death for my son's family, and something inside me went ice cold. I'm Lorraine Caldwell, 65 years old, retired math teacher, widow. I raised my son Dennis to respect women, to treat his wife as an equal partner. I thought I'd done a good job. I thought their marriage was happy. I thought his mother Constance ran a fair operation on the family farm. I was wrong about all of it. The woman I watched that morning wasn't a daughter-in-law visiting for the weekend. She was unpaid labor. A servant, maybe even a slave, and the person exploiting her wasn't some stranger. It was family, my son's own mother. Possibly my son himself. But let me start from the beginning, from the moment I first suspected something was terribly wrong. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Before we dive in, please drop a comment. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed everything? I read everyone. A quick note, some details here are fictionalized for storytelling, but the heart of this story, the lesson is what truly matters. At 65, I had become the kind of woman people barely noticed a retired math teacher in sensible shoes, driving a modest sedan through the pre-dawn darkness toward my son's farm. Rain hammered my windshield as I navigated the empty roads of Plymouth, Wisconsin. Planning to surprise my 7-year-old granddaughter Nell for her birthday, the dashboard clock read 5:15 a.m. Too early for a social visit. But I'd driven 2 hours from Fond du Lac with birthday presents and the kind of optimism that comes from not knowing you're about to see something that changes everything. I turned into the long gravel drive of Ashford Dairy Farm and killed my headlights, not wanting to wake the house. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see the workyard lit by a single bare bulb swinging in the wind. The main house stood dark and silent. No smoke from the chimney, no lights in any window. A good family, still sleeping in the warmth of their beds on this miserable March morning. Then I saw her. My daughter-in-law Meadow, 34 years old, holder of a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Wisconsin, was hauling 50-pound feed sacks across the muddy yard. Alone, in the freezing rain, wearing clothes so soaked they clung to her like a second skin. I watched her lift another sack from the pallet, her back bending under the weight, her boots sinking into mud that came up past her ankles. She staggered 3 steps, dropped the sack onto a growing pile near the barn, then turned back for another. No coat, no gloves. No one helping her. The main house remained completely dark. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. No one should be working in this cold. Not alone. Not like this. Meadow had married my son Dennis 5 years ago. A bright young woman with a sharp mind and a degree that could have taken her anywhere. She'd chosen family, chosen the farm, chosen what I'd thought was a good life. I'd visited perhaps once a quarter, always greeted with smiles in the chaos of a happy household. My granddaughter Nell would run to hug me. Dennis would shake my hand. Meadow would pour coffee and chat about crops and weather and all the mundane beauty of rural life. But I'd never visited at dawn. I'd never seen this. What kind of family asks this of someone they're supposed to love? I sat frozen in my warm car, engine still running, watching Meadow complete another brutal cycle. Lift, stagger, drop, return. Her movements were mechanical, practiced. The rhythm of someone who'd done this same task 1,000 times before. Through the rain, I could see her breath coming in ragged clouds. Her shoulders hunched, not just against the cold, but against something heavier. This wasn't the woman I'd known. The accountant who'd laughed at my retirement party. Who'd talked about maybe starting a bookkeeping business from home. Who'd seemed so genuinely happy at her own wedding. That woman had disappeared, replaced by this stranger hauling feed in the dark like an unpaid laborer. The farmhouse lights finally flickered on bedroom windows on the second floor. Someone was waking up. But not to help, not to join her. Just waking up, while Meadow worked alone in conditions that would break most people. I counted the sacks she'd already moved. 12, 15, 20. 600 pounds of feed hauled through mud in the freezing rain before the sun had even considered rising. This wasn't a farm, this was a trap. I released the steering wheel, my hands aching from how tightly I'd been gripping it. My daughter-in-law bent to lift another sack. And for a moment I didn't recognize her at all, not her posture, not her movements, not the defeated slope of her shoulders. Meadow, who'd graduated summa cum laude. Meadow, who'd smiled on her wedding day like she'd won the lottery. Meadow, who in 5 years had become someone I no longer knew. For the first time in 34 years of motherhood, I realized I had no idea what was really happening in my son's house, or what my daughter-in-law had been protecting me from seeing. I gave myself an hour in that car, 60 minutes, to transform shock into composure, to bury what I'd seen behind the mask of a casual morning visit. The kitchen smelled like coffee and burning toast. Meadow appeared moments after I knocked, damp hair and a fresh ponytail, wearing clean clothes that couldn't hide her still shaking hands. "Mom," her voice pitched too high, "what a wonderful surprise. I didn't know you were coming." "I wanted to surprise Nell for her birthday," I said, watching for any crack in the performance. "I hope it's not too early." "Not at all." She pulled me into a hug, her body still cold despite fresh clothes. "I was just helping Dennis with the morning feeding. You know how it is on a farm. Everyone pitches in." Everyone pitches in, as if I hadn't watched her haul 600 pounds alone through freezing rain. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Nell Ashford burst into the kitchen, 10 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's earnest face, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon horses. She had no idea that her innocent chatter with Grandma would become the thread that unraveled everything. "Grandma, you're here for my birthday. Did you bring presents?" I caught her in a hug, grateful for the distraction. "Of course I did, sweetheart, but you'll have to wait until after breakfast." While Nell bounced around showing me drawings, I watched Meadow move through the kitchen with jerky efficiency, pulling out mugs, burning her hand on the coffee pot and barely flinching, dropping a spoon twice. Her smile never wavered, but exhaustion showed in every too-quick movement. "You look tired, sweetheart," I said carefully. "Are you sleeping enough?" "Oh, Mom, you worry too much." Her laugh sounded like breaking glass. "I'm fine. Really, everything's wonderful here." How long has she been wearing this mask? How many times have I sat in this kitchen, blind to what was right in front of me? I'd visited perhaps 4 times a year since the wedding, always welcomed with this cheerful performance. Nell showing school projects, Meadow serving elaborate meals, Dennis talking about crops. Everything carefully staged, carefully normal. But I'd never arrived at dawn before. I'd never seen what happened when the cameras weren't rolling. Meadow turned to pour orange juice, and I caught the wince she couldn't hide as she lifted the carton. Her entire body radiated exhaustion that comes from weeks of too much work and too little rest. "The farm's doing well. Then," I asked, testing. "Oh, yes," she said quickly, too quickly. "Very well. Dennis works so hard, and his mother manages everything. We're all just one big happy team." She smiled at me over her coffee mug, and something in my chest went cold. That smile? I'd seen it before. Not last Christmas, not last Easter. I'd seen it 30 years ago when she was a teenager. The exact expression she wore hiding failed tests or broken curfews. The smile that said, "Please don't ask more questions. Please just believe me. Please let me protect you from the truth." That smile, God help me, I knew that smile. She'd been using it on me for years, maybe since the wedding. Maybe since the day she'd moved into this house and discovered what kind of family she'd married into. And I'd been too trusting, too distant, too willing to take her cheerful updates at face value. The smile spreading across my daughter-in-law's face was one I'd memorized decades ago. Seeing it now, in this kitchen, with her hands still trembling from hauling feed in the dark, told me everything. She'd been lying to me for years about everything that mattered. The lies had been so careful, so practiced, I might never have seen through them if I hadn't arrived at dawn. But now I knew the truth was somewhere in this house, and I was going to find it. I waited until Meadow's boots disappeared toward the barn that afternoon. Waited until Nell's breathing softened into sleep after I'd offered to help with her nap. Then I did what any mother would do when she knows her child is lying. I went looking for the truth. Meadow's bedroom smelled like lavender and exhaustion. The space was sparse, just a bed, a dresser, one small bookshelf. No personal touches beyond a single photo of Nell on the nightstand. The room of someone who'd given up claiming space, who'd learned to make herself small. I started with the dresser drawers, moving methodically, replacing everything exactly as I'd found it. Nothing but clothes folded with military precision. The closet held work boots caked in mud and 3 nearly identical outfits. Under the bed, just dust. I was smoothing the quilt back into place when my hand touched something hard beneath the mattress. A notebook. Deliberately hidden. The kind of small spiral-bound ledger I'd used to track student grades for 35 years. I pulled it out with shaking hands and opened to the first page. March 15th, 2023. The date Meadow had moved into this house as a bride. My eyes scanned the first entry, 4 a.m. barn cleaning, fed 120 head of cattle, VAT sterilization, 6 hours, no pay. I turned the page. March 22nd, 2023. Mucking stalls, equipment maintenance, feed prep, 7 hours. Nothing. Another page. April 2nd, 2023. Dawn to dusk fieldwork, 12 hours, 0 compensation. The entries continued, day after day, week after week, each one meticulously documented with dates, hours, tasks, all without a single dollar of payment. Page after page, month after month, year after year. My daughter-in-law had been counting her own slavery. I flipped faster, watching the hours accumulate. 50 hours one week, 60 the next. Weeks where she worked more than full-time farmhands while Dennis collected payment for the labor. The handwriting grew shakier as the months progressed, exhaustion bleeding into the strokes. August 2024. Week totals 52 hours. Constance says family doesn't pay family. Dennis agrees. January 2026. Calculated total to date approximately $60,000 owed if paid standard farm worker rate. $60,000. 3 years of stolen wages, documented in neat columns like the accountant she'd been trained to be. My hands trembled as I reached the final entries. 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, 3 days ago. Then I saw the line that stopped my heart. February 18th, 2026, Constance threatened to handle me if I complain again. Dennis said nothing. I have nowhere to go. Nell needs stability. I can't tell Mom she'd worry, but she has no money to help. She lives on teacher's pension in that little house. What could she possibly do? She thought she was protecting me. She had no idea I could save her with a phone call. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the notebook that documented her stolen life, and wanted to scream at the bitter irony. She thought I was poor, a retired teacher barely scraping by in my modest cottage, someone who needed protecting from harsh truths. She had no idea. 35 years of teaching mathematics at Fond du Lac High School. 35 years of living below my means, investing every spare dollar. Watching compound interest work its slow magic while I wore the same sensible shoes year after year. 35 years of building a portfolio that now held $2.8 million in stocks, bonds, and real estate investments. Enough to buy this failing farm 3 times over. Enough to dictate its future. Enough to destroy anyone who'd stolen from my daughter-in-law. She'd been protecting me from worry, believing I was helpless. She had no idea that the woman in sensible shoes had enough money to buy her freedom with a single signature. I tucked the notebook back exactly as I'd found it, said cheerful goodbyes, and drove home with a weapon I hadn't expected and a fury I'd never felt before. The phone rang as I crossed into Fond du Lac County. I answered on the 3rd ring. Lorraine, I've been meaning to call for weeks. Vernon Sinclair, 66 years old and quietly powerful as only a small-town bank president can be. He'd been my late husband Tom's closest friend since high school. Vernon's phone call that evening would change everything. Vernon, what a surprise. I know, I'm terrible about keeping in touch. How are you holding up? That house must feel empty. Some days more than others, I said, but I keep busy. Tom would have been proud of how you've carried on. That man adored you. He paused. You managing okay financially? I know teacher pensions aren't exactly generous. I'm fine, I said, letting him hear the pride of someone living modestly. The pension covers everything. I don't need much. We chatted about mutual friends, church gossip, the wet spring, comfortable conversation between old acquaintances. Then Vernon sighed in that particular way that signals heavier topics. Work's been stressful lately. Too many good people drowning in debt they can't service. This economy's brutal on family farms. I imagine so. Actually, speaking of farms, the Ashford dairy operation. Isn't that where your daughter-in-law ended up, Meadow? Right? How's she doing out there? My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She seems happy. Farm life suits her. Good. Good. He paused. Between you and me, Lorraine, that operation's in rough shape. We've got them on the default watch list. $1.6 million in debt, 60 days past due. We're looking at starting foreclosure proceedings in about 45 days if they can't make payment. $1.6 million, 45 days. How many cruelties in this world start as someone's desperate attempt to survive? Suddenly, everything made terrible sense. Constance wasn't working Meadow to death out of pure malice. She was trying to save a drowning farm with free labor. The exploitation wasn't random cruelty. It was systematic desperation. That's awful, I said carefully. Does the family know how serious it is? Oh, they know. Dennis has been in twice to beg for extensions. His mother, Constance, handles the books. Sharp woman, but she can't make money appear out of thin air. He paused. Don't mention I told you. Obviously. Bank confidentiality. But I thought you should know, in case Meadow needs, well, in case things get difficult. I appreciate you telling me, Vernon. Desperate times make people do terrible things, he said quietly. Sometimes things that look like cruelty are just fear wearing a different face. Sometimes, I agreed, but not always, and not an excuse. We said our goodbyes with promises to have coffee soon. I drove the last miles on autopilot, my mind racing through calculations. 1.6 million in debt, 45 days until foreclosure. A daughter-in-law worked to exhaustion without being paid $1. A family so desperate they'd turn to slavery to survive. 45 days. They thought it was their deadline. It was mine. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the dark cab, phone still warm in my hand. From my glove box, I pulled a scrap of paper and wrote 45 days in block letters. Taped it to my dashboard where I'd see it every morning. Not their countdown to losing everything, my countdown to taking it from them. I had 45 days to investigate, to plan, to build my case. 45 days before the bank moved and changed all the variables. 45 days to save my daughter-in-law from people who thought a retired teacher in sensible shoes posed no threat at all. The 45 days started ticking the moment I woke up the next morning. I spent the first week planning my approach, practicing in front of my bathroom mirror until I could transform into exactly what Constance Ashford would expect a harmless, confused old woman who understood nothing about business or power. I practiced the performance in my car before walking to the door, letting my shoulders round, my voice soften. My words trail into harmless confusion, the mask of a woman who understood nothing and threatened no one. Meadow opened the door looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Behind her stood a woman I recognized from Dennis's wedding photos, but had somehow avoided meeting until now. Constance Ashford. 68 and granite-faced. She ruled her failing dairy empire with the same iron grip her own mother had used on her, a cycle she couldn't see she was perpetuating. Everything about her radiated authority, the straight spine, the assessing eyes, the way she occupied space like it belonged to her by divine right. "Mother Caldwell," she said, not moving to greet me. "Meadow mentioned you might visit again." "Oh, I hope it's not an imposition." I let my hands flutter nervously. I know farms are so busy, and I don't want to be in the way. I've never understood farm business, all those numbers and equipment. It's beyond me. Something in Constance's posture shifted. The wariness softened into dismissal. "Not at all," she said, though her tone said otherwise. "Please, come in." The living room smelled like old wood and disappointment. I settled onto the couch, making a show of being slightly overwhelmed by my surroundings. "Such a big operation you have here," I said, gesturing vaguely. "I'm just a retired teacher. You see, I taught children to add and subtract, but real money matters no. No, that was always my husband's department. God rest him." "How unfortunate," Constance said, and I could see her filing me away as not a threat. "Teaching is noble work, of course, though it doesn't prepare one for the complexities of agricultural business." "Oh, certainly not," I laughed self-deprecatingly. "Meadow's always been the smart one. I just hope she's not working too hard, but what do I know? I'm sure you run things properly." There is no weapon more dangerous than being underestimated. I had just handed her that weapon, and she thought it was a gift. Constance's entire demeanor changed. She began speaking more freely, even harshly. "Meadow, stop standing there. The afternoon milking equipment needs cleaning now, not later." Meadow flinched automatically, nodded, and hurried toward the kitchen. I watched Constance watch her go, satisfaction evident in every line of her body. She wasn't just comfortable ordering her daughter-in-law around in front of me, she seemed pleased to have a witness to her control. "Farm life requires discipline," Constance said, settling into her chair with the certainty of someone explaining simple facts to a simple mind. "Some people understand that. Others need guidance. I'm sure you know best," I said, letting confusion cloud my features. It all seems so complicated to me. "Your mother seems like such a sweet, simple woman." "Meadow," Constance called toward the kitchen, voice carrying clear condescension. "No wonder you never mentioned she might interfere with how things are run here." From the kitchen, Meadow's voice came back small and careful. "She won't cause any trouble. It's nice having family who understands their place, Mrs. Caldwell," Constance continued, turning back to me with something like approval. "Some people know when to stay out of matters beyond them." She'd checked me for fangs and found only dentures. Perfect. "Oh yes," I agreed, smiling my most harmless smile. "I wouldn't dream of interfering. I just like visiting my granddaughter." When I left that afternoon, Constance actually patted my shoulder. "Your mother's a sweet, simple woman," she told Meadow at the door. "No need to worry, she'll cause trouble." I smiled all the way to my car. They'd invited the wolf into their house, dismissed her as a confused old hen, and given her unrestricted access to watch, to listen, to gather every piece of evidence she'd need to tear their world apart. The access came faster than I'd hoped. By the following Sunday, Constance barely noticed my presence. I'd become furniture harmless, ignorable, perfectly positioned to observe everything. Children tell you everything if you just walk slowly enough and listen carefully. That Sunday afternoon with Nell, walking through the fields behind the farm, I learned exactly how much Meadow had been hiding. The air smelled like thawing earth and manure. Nell skipped ahead of me on the dirt road, picking up interesting rocks and chattering about school. I let her lead the conversation, responding with gentle questions, giving her space to fill with whatever came to mind. "Mom likes walking here too," Nell said, examining a smooth stone. "But she doesn't walk with me much anymore. She's always too tired." "Does she seem very tired lately?" "Yeah." Nell tossed the stone into the ditch. "Sometimes I go out to find her and she's in the barn crying. But she stops when she sees me." My hand clenched around the walking stick I'd brought as part of my old woman costume. "Crying? Is she sad about something?" "She says she's just tired, Grandma, but her face is all red and her eyes are puffy." Nell said it like reporting the weather something normal, unremarkable. "I don't think Mom knows I see her. I pretend I don't notice because it makes her sad when I ask." I kept my voice soft, grandmother gentle. "When does this happen, sweetheart?" After really long work days, like when she has to clean all the equipment by herself, Nell bent to pick another rock. "Grandma Constance says crying is weak, so I don't tell anyone I saw. Out of the mouths of children comes truth they don't know is unbearable." "You're very observant," I said, my throat tight. "Does Grandma Constance see your mom crying?" "I don't think so. Mom only cries when she's alone." Nell paused, considering. "Well, except mealtimes." "Mealtimes?" "When Mom doesn't finish her work fast enough. Grandma says she has to eat by herself in the kitchen after we're all done." Nell explained it matter-of-factly, the way children explain rules they've learned to accept. "Grandma says it's teaching Mom to be more responsible. That's what family does, helps each other learn." I stopped walking, made myself breathe, made myself sound merely curious rather than homicidal. "Your mom eats separate from the family. Only when she's slow or makes mistakes." Nell squinted at something in the distance. "Like last Tuesday. She didn't get the milking done on time because the equipment broke, so she had to eat alone. Grandma says it helps her remember to work harder." "I see," I said, though I was seeing far more than Nell intended to reveal. "And sometimes if Mom's really behind, she doesn't eat at all." Nell's voice stayed light, reporting simple facts. "Last week she fell asleep in the barn before dinner. Grandma said she'd learned from missing the meal. Systematic starvation, isolation, humiliation, not just financial exploitation, deliberate psychological breaking." "That must be hard for you to watch," I said carefully. "I guess." Nell shrugged with a child's adaptation to horror. "Grandma Constance says Mom needs to toughen up. That's what Grandpa Dennis always says too. That farm life requires discipline." The casual acceptance in her voice was the worst part. This wasn't a child describing abuse, this was a child describing normal. Nell had watched her mother be starved and isolated until it seemed ordinary, expected. Just how things worked in this family. My granddaughter thought starvation was a lesson. God help me, I wanted to burn that farm to the ground. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had documentation that would hold up against any defense they tried to mount. Not until I could prove this systematically and irrefutably to anyone who needed to see it. I held Nell's small hand in mine, gripping tighter than I meant to as we walked back toward the house. Inside me, a storm was building, the kind that levels everything in its path. But to Nell, I was just Grandma taking a nice Sunday walk, smiling and nodding, while she told me all about how normal it was for her mother to be starved and humiliated. 4 days after that walk with Nell, I sat across from Simone Mercer in her cramped office above a hardware store in Sheboygan. She was 52, dressed in a wrinkled blazer that suggested competence without pretense. And her desk was buried under case files with sticky notes in 3 colors. The nameplate said forensic accountant. But the framed newspaper clipping on the wall, "Local expert exposes $4 million farm fraud scheme," told me everything I needed to know. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her, "you mentioned family business fraud on the phone." I set the notebook on her desk, the one I'd photographed in Constance's office, the one documenting $60,000 in stolen labor. Beside it, I placed printed bank statements showing wire transfers from Constance's account, patterns that matched the notebook dates almost perfectly. My daughter-in-law has been exploiting my granddaughter for 3 years, I said. Unpaid farm labor disguised as family contribution. The child is 14. Simone flipped through the notebook slowly, her expression unchanging. She'd seen worse, I suspected. Rural fraud had a way of hiding in plain sight, wrapped in words like duty and tradition. You photographed this without permission? She asked. I did. Illegally obtained evidence has limitations in court. I'm not interested in court yet, I said. I'm interested in documentation, patterns, proof that turns suspicion into certainty. She looked up then, meeting my eyes with something like approval. How many daughters were out there right now, working themselves to death while families called it love? What's your timeline? Simone asked. The farm is 41 days from foreclosure, I said. 1.6 million in debt. I need to understand the full scope of the exploitation before I make my move. She tapped her pen against the notebook. You said move. What kind of move? The kind that ensures my granddaughter never works another unpaid hour, and the people who used her face consequences. Simone nodded slowly, the kind of nod that said she'd heard variations of this story before grandmother arrives too late. Discovers the damage. Wants justice that the system rarely provides. I can give you a preliminary analysis in 3 business days, she said. Bank pattern matching, labor law violations, potential criminal exposure. If there's fraud beyond the notebook, I'll find it. What's your retainer? $5,000 for the initial investigation. If this goes to litigation or law enforcement, we renegotiate. I wrote the check without hesitation, my hand steady despite the rage still simmering beneath every calculated word. The storm Nell couldn't see had found its direction, not wild destruction, but precision. One more thing, I said as I stood to leave. My daughter-in-law believes I'm a poor retired teacher scraping by on Social Security. I'd like to keep it that way. Simone's smile was thin but genuine. Underestimation is a tactical advantage. Mrs. Caldwell, I won't compromise it. I shook her hand firm, professional. The grip of someone who'd dismantled lies for a living and walked back to my car with something I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time since that dawn discovery, I felt something besides rage. I felt the possibility of winning. 3 business days. 72 hours until suspicion became documentation. Until my quiet fury transformed into evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I drove home through the March cold, the notebook copies safe in my locked desk drawer, and thought about the family gathering Constance had mentioned some cousin's birthday party next weekend. I'd be there, playing my role, watching, listening. 3 business days, 72 hours until suspicion became documentation. Sometimes you find your allies in the last place you'd look sitting across a fire pit, watching your daughter suffer, carrying the weight of having suffered exactly the same way. The 72-hour countdown had barely begun when Constance called about the family gathering. I arrived Saturday evening with store-bought pie and my best confused grandmother smile, ready to observe. The backyard fire pit crackled against the March cold, flames throwing shadows across family members in camping chairs. Constance held court from the largest seat, wrapped in a wool blanket like a benevolent matriarch. "Meadow, we need more firewood," she called. "Now." "Not later, can't you see people are cold?" Meadow materialized from shadows, 14 and moving with practiced efficiency. She gathered logs without complaint. "And after that, clear these dishes," Constance added. "Really? You'd think after all this time you'd anticipate what needs doing." Nobody objected. Nobody even seemed to notice except one person. Willa Ashford sat 3 chairs to my left, 31 years old and hollow-eyed, dressed in an oversized cardigan that looked like armor. She kept her mother's books with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned that invisibility was survival Constance's younger daughter who'd moved to Chicago after college, then returned 2 years ago when the debt became unmanageable. I watched her watching Meadow. "Willa dear, sit down and rest," Constance said warmly. "You work so hard with those books, Meadow can handle the physical work." Willa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She didn't look at her mother, just kept her eyes on Meadow, who was balancing plates while trying to open the back door. When Constance snapped, "Careful with those plates," Willa flinched. Not dramatic, just a tiny, involuntary reaction, like someone conditioned to expect punishment for mistakes that weren't even hers. Her fingers gripped the chair arms, knuckles white in the firelight. There's a look people get when they're watching their own past unfold in front of them. Willa Ashford had that look. I adjusted my blanket and played my role sweet. Oblivious, grandmother, but I didn't miss the way Willa's eyes followed Meadow with something that wasn't indifference or complicity. It was recognition and guilt. The kind of guilt that comes from surviving something your younger sister is now experiencing. Meadow returned, and Constance immediately sent her for coffee refills. Willa's expression flickered pain, maybe, or anger so carefully buried it barely registered. She looked defeated in a way that transcended tiredness. At 31, she should have been building her own life, but instead, she sat in her mother's backyard, trapped by debt or duty or something darker. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night. Then Willa's eyes found mine across the flames. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, just a brief moment of connection, but I saw everything. She knew exactly what was being done to Meadow because it had once been done to her. She wasn't on her mother's side. She was trapped too, watching history repeat with the helplessness of someone who'd already fought this battle and lost. But there was something else in her eyes before she looked away. Something that looked almost like hope that someone finally saw what was happening. I'd been searching for evidence. Instead, I'd found a witness who might also be a survivor. The gathering continued small talk about crops and weather. Laughter at family jokes I didn't understand. Constance pontificated about responsibility while Meadow worked in shadows. And Willa sat very still, staring into flames like they held answers she'd been seeking for years. I left at 9:30 with warm goodbyes and promises to visit soon. But as I drove away, I thought about that moment across the fire, 2 women who understood the same truth from different angles. Willa Ashford might be the key to everything, or she might be too broken to help. Either way, I had 69 hours left until Simone's findings turned suspicion into documentation. Numbers don't lie the way people do, which is why I'd waited 3 days for Simone to transform my granddaughter's stolen years into evidence that couldn't smile and pretend everything was fine. The 69 hours had passed. Tuesday morning found me back in that cramped office above the hardware store, watching Simone Mercer slide a thick folder across her desk. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said. They kept perfect records. I opened the folder. The first page was a spreadsheet columns of dates, hours, tasks, all cross-referenced with the farm's own ledgers. Milking schedules, equipment maintenance, animal care, facility cleaning. 3 years of Meadow's life, logged with meticulous precision. Every shift documented, Simone continued. Every task recorded in their handwriting, signed off in their books. Total hours over 3 years, 3,840. I traced my finger down the columns. The hours blurred together. 4 a.m. starts, 9 p.m. finishes, weekends with no breaks. A child's adolescence measured in unpaid labor. At Wisconsin's prevailing market rate for experienced farm labor, $15.63 per hour, the total value of your granddaughter's work comes to $60,019.20. Simone tapped the bottom line where the number sat in bold $60,019.20. Every hour logged as family contribution, she said. Every dollar unpaid. $60,000. My granddaughter had been worth $60,000 to them, and they'd paid her nothing. I turned the page. More spreadsheets, more documentation, all pulled from the farm's own record-keeping system. They hadn't hidden the exploitation. They'd cataloged it, categorized it, made it part of their official business practices. "Mrs. Caldwell, they documented their own crime," Simone said quietly. "These are their books, their handwriting, their signatures." I looked up at her. "What else?" She pulled out a second set of papers, tax returns. IRS Form 1040-F, highlighted sections showing deductions. They claimed federal tax deductions for family labor contributions while paying zero compensation, she said. Over 3 years, approximately $48,000 in deductions for labor they categorized as unpaid family help. The air in the office felt suddenly thin. "They claimed deductions," I asked, "for work they never compensated. The IRS considers unpaid family labor legitimate only if it's genuinely voluntary short-term help during harvest. Occasional weekend support? This," she gestured to the 3 years of full-time documented work, "this isn't voluntary. This is systematic exploitation." "So they stole her labor," I said slowly, "and then claimed tax benefits for the theft." "Yes. They profited twice, once by not paying her, and again by reducing their tax burden with deductions for labor costs they never actually incurred." Simone's expression was professionally neutral, but I could see the anger underneath. She'd built a career exposing rural fraud, And this case had all the markers of the worst kind family exploiting family, wrapped in the language of tradition and duty while filing federal paperwork to monetize the crime. "Mrs. Caldwell, this isn't just exploitation," she said. "This is federal tax fraud. How many other daughters-in-law were out there, working themselves to death while someone claimed their labor as a tax write-off? You asked for documentation that would stand up in court," Simone continued. "This could stand up in federal court. Labor theft, wage violations, tax fraud, all documented in their own records." I closed the folder carefully, my hands steady despite the rage burning through every careful breath. 3 years. $60,000. Federal fraud. And they'd written it all down themselves, confident that no one would ever question the natural order of a daughter helping her family. "This isn't family helping family," I said. "This is calculated theft recorded, logged, and monetized." Simone nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell. And the beauty of calculated theft is that calculations work both ways. They documented everything we need to destroy them. The best disguise is the truth worn backward. I pretended to be a confused old woman who couldn't work her phone, which meant no one noticed when I documented everything that would destroy them." Simone's evidence was damning, but it needed context proof that the documented hours weren't just numbers, but lived reality. So, starting April 1st, I became a regular visitor to the farm, arriving with cookies and questions about my phone. "Oh dear, I never can figure out this contraption," I said on my 3rd visit, fumbling with my smartphone in the kitchen while Constance barked orders at Meadow. "Which button makes it take pictures again?" "The one with the camera icon." "Lorraine," Constance said absently, not looking up from her coffee. "Oh my, I think I pressed something by accident," I exclaimed, perfectly capturing a photo of the work schedule posted on the fridge Meadow. 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days listed. Over 8 visits spanning 2 weeks. I perfected the performance. I asked Meadow to help me take photos of Nell while accidentally capturing her grandmother scrubbing equipment at dawn. I fumbled with apps in the equipment shed, photographing time logs that confirmed every hour Simone had calculated. I dropped the phone twice pure theater while recording Constance's voice cutting through the barn. "Meadow, honey, show Grandma how to—" "Oh, it's doing something." Click. Another photo of the duty roster. "Constance, you'll have to forgive me. These modern phones are beyond an old teacher." Smile, bumbling confusion, perfect cover. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same ageist assumptions that made people dismiss elderly women as technologically incompetent provided the perfect surveillance cover. No one suspects the confused grandmother. Every photo was a risk, every recording a gamble. Every visit brought me closer to either justice or exposure. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered the voice recording function. Photos showed the hours. Audio captured the cruelty. On my 5th visit, I accidentally activated it while Constance supervised morning chores. "Move faster," her voice cut through the barn. "We don't pay you to rest. Oh, wait. We don't pay you at all." Meadow's silence was deafening in the recording. Visit 6. If you can't handle the work, maybe you shouldn't eat with the family tonight. Visit 7. You're 14 years old and you can't manage basic animal care. What's wrong with you? I listened to each recording that night in my locked bedroom, transcribing the worst parts, cataloging the pattern. Threats, demeaning comments, psychological manipulation disguised as family management. By April 15th, I had 14 photos and 7 audio clips. The documentation was systematic, undeniable hours matched to abuse matched to the exploitation Simone had quantified. That's number 7. I thought after the last recording. 7 times she's threatened food. Federal prosecutors love patterns. But the risk escalated with each visit. My hands shook more. The performance grew harder to maintain. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from being 2 people at once, the harmless fool and the patient hunter. On my 8th visit, disaster nearly struck. I'd activated the voice recorder in the kitchen, phone tucked in my cardigan pocket, when it beeped low battery warning. The sound cut through Constance's monologue about Meadow's inadequate cleaning. Her head snapped toward me. "What was that?" My hands trembled as I fumbled the phone from my pocket, laughing with what I hoped sounded like confusion rather than terror. "Oh my, I must have pressed something," I said, turning it over in my shaking hands. Constance stared at me. 3 seconds that felt like hours, her eyes calculating. Suspicious, searching for deception beneath the elderly woman performance. Then she turned away. "That phone is going to be the death of you." Lorraine. I laughed weakly and tucked it back in my pocket, where it sat like a bomb against my ribs. One more mistake like that and everything the evidence. The plan. Meadow's freedom would evaporate. That night, I backed up every file to 3 separate locations and decided no more documentation. What I had would have to be enough. Because I couldn't risk another 3-second stare. Nell's sticky fingers leave grape jelly prints on my passenger seat leather. Her 3rd breakfast bar of the morning, and I'm grateful for the distraction from my still trembling hands. 3 days had passed since the phone beep in Constance's kitchen. 3 days of waking at 2 a.m. replaying that 3-second stare. I'd backed up every file, transferred copies to Simone, and sworn off further surveillance. But my hand still shook when I held the phone. Today was dentist day, Nell's 6-month cleaning in Millbrook. Simple. Safe. No risk of exposure. Grandma, can I tell you something? Nell asked from the passenger seat, swinging her legs. Of course, sweetheart. There's a field trip next month to the Madison Zoo. We need $30 for the permission slip. That sounds wonderful, I said, keeping my eyes on the road. I'd be happy to help with that. Mom says Aunt Willa will help like she always does, Nell said casually, reaching for another breakfast bar. My attention sharpened, but I kept my voice light. Oh, does Aunt Willa help with field trips often? Not just field trips, other stuff too. Groceries sometimes. Mom's new work boots last month. Nell unwrapped the bar, completely unaware of the significance. Aunt Willa gives her money. I navigated a turn carefully, buying time to process. That's very kind of her. She puts it in Mom's apron pocket when Grandma's not looking, Nell continued. Like a secret, every week or two, I think. Mom told me not to tell Grandma Constance. My breath caught. But I can tell you, though, Nell added. You're different. I reached over and squeezed her sticky hand. Thank you for trusting me. Honey. Inside. My mind raced. Willa hadn't been passively watching the exploitation, she'd been actively subverting it. The money in the apron pocket wasn't charity. It was resistance. Covert, careful, consistent resistance. How many times had I sat across from Willa at Sunday dinners, watching her smile politely at Constance's pronouncements, and missed what she was really doing every week or two? For how long? Months, years, while Constance documented theft in farm ledgers. Willa had been slipping cash to the daughter-in-law her mother was exploiting. Not enough to escape, never enough to raise questions, but enough to survive. The flinch I'd seen at the fire pit wasn't just recognition. It was guilt. The guilt of someone who'd survived the same abuse and could only offer pocket money to the next victim. Mom says Aunt Willa understands, Nell said, oblivious to my realization. She said Aunt Willa used to work really hard on the farm too, before she went to Chicago. Before she escaped, I thought. Before she got away and then came back. The question was, why did she come back? The farm debt timeline matched. Willa had returned 2 years ago when Constance needed a bookkeeper. Had she been trapped by guilt obligation, or had she come back specifically to help? Your Aunt Willa sounds like a very thoughtful person, I said carefully. She's nice, Nell agreed. She doesn't yell like Grandma Constance. I filed that detail away with all the others, the flinch, the hollow eyes, the weekly cash drops, the return to a place she'd escaped. Willa Ashford was either a survivor trying to help from inside, or someone so broken by her mother she'd never truly escaped. Either way, I needed to know which. And tomorrow I'd have my chance. That coffee date I'd scheduled last week, casual suggestion. Grandmother getting to know her son's family better suddenly became something else entirely. 20 hours, that's all I had to prepare. I pulled into the dentist's parking lot and helped Nell unbuckle, watching her skip toward the entrance with the careless confidence of a child who didn't yet understand the weight of secrets. Tomorrow's coffee with Willa sat in my calendar like a loaded question. Either I'd gain an ally who was already inside the operation, or I'd reveal my hand to someone who might warn Constance. As Nell disappeared through the glass doors, I realized I was about to find out which Ashford daughter actually had a conscience. Willa's hands wrap around her coffee mug so tightly the ceramic creaks. The answer to my question, which Ashford daughter had a conscience, sat across from me in the back booth of Corner Cafe in Plymouth, looking like someone who'd spent 9 years carrying a weight too heavy to name. I'd started with safe territory, Nell's dentist visit, the upcoming field trip, spring weather finally arriving. Willa responded with the right words in the right places. But her attention kept drifting to the cafe entrance like she expected Constance to materialize. Meadow seems so devoted to the farm work, I said carefully, watching her face. Willa's fingers tightened on the mug. Devoted? Yes, that's one word for it. You sound like there's another word you'd use. She looked at me, then really looked, and I saw the calculation behind her hollow eyes. Whatever she was about to say would be irreversible. Trapped, she said quietly. Exploited, stolen from. Take your pick. I set my own coffee down and leaned forward. Tell me. Willa glanced around the cafe, 3 other tables. No one close enough to hear, and something in her posture shifted. The careful performance dropped away. I wake up every morning and see her living my life over again, she said. Same hours, same commands, same promises that it's temporary, that family helps family, that someday she'll be appreciated. My chest tightened. Willa? I was Dennis's wife before Meadow, she continued. Words coming faster now like a dam breaking. Not legally. We were engaged for 3 years while I worked the farm. Constance convinced him we needed to wait until the operation was more stable, until I'd proven I understood what farm life required. How long did it go on for you? 3 years of working like a tenant farmer on land my husband supposedly owned. Her laugh was bitter. 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. Every day, no pay, no acknowledgement. Just Constance's voice telling me I wasn't working hard enough, wasn't committed enough, wasn't worthy of the family name. How many daughters-in-law had Constance burned through before someone bothered to count? I ran away when I was 22, Willa said. Made it to Chicago. Survived 2 years on minimum wage jobs and a studio apartment with 3 roommates. Then I got evicted, lost my job during the pandemic, and... She stopped, staring into her coffee. I came back because I had nowhere else. Constance offered me bookkeeper work, paid work this time. I thought maybe it would be different, but it wasn't. No. She just found a new daughter-in-law to exploit. Dennis married Meadow 6 months after I returned, and I watched it start all over again. The pattern crystallized in my mind not opportunistic abuse, but a refined system. Constance had perfected it with Willa, learned what worked, what broke people, what kept them silent. Then she'd deployed it again with Meadow. The money you've been giving her, I said. Pocket change, enough for groceries or field trip fees, never enough to escape. Willa's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I'm terrified Constance will find out. Why didn't you tell anyone before now? Who would I tell Dennis thinks it's normal? Constance convinced him that's how family works. Daughters-in-law prove themselves through service. And her voice cracked. I left. I survived. What right did I have to speak for someone who stayed 3 years? Then Meadows 3. 6 years of stolen labor from 2 women. Willa, I said gently, you're speaking now. She looked up at me, eyes wet. I was the next daughter-in-law before her. No one saved me. The words hung between us like confession and accusation both. She wasn't just sympathetic, she was a survivor. And if Constance had done this successfully before, she'd perfected the system. The question wasn't whether Willa would help me expose it. The question was whether she was strong enough to face what she'd spent 9 years trying to forget. Simone slides the mortgage document across her desk before I've even finished sitting down. We need to talk about this, she says. I'd spent a week wrestling with the question of whether Willa was strong enough to testify. But the document in front of me suggested I might not need her testimony at all. The header read, Second Mortgage Agreement. Property address 1847 County Road K. Millbrook. Loan amount $200,000. Date 18 months ago, November 2024. This mortgage shouldn't exist, Simone said. Not without your daughter-in-law's signature. I scanned the page. What if she did sign it under pressure? Then we'd see her on the loan application. But look, Simone pointed to the borrower section. Only Constance and Dennis are listed. Meadows' name appears nowhere except on the property deed they used as collateral. My chest tightened. The property is in her name. Wedding gift from Dennis's late father. Transferred to Meadow outright 3 years ago, 15 acres of tillable land worth approximately $300,000. And 18 months ago, someone secured a $200,000 loan against it. $200,000, stolen with a pen. Simone pulled out a second document, the original property deed with Meadows' signature from 3 years ago. Then she placed it beside the mortgage paperwork, where another signature claiming to be Meadows appeared at the bottom. See the baseline drift here? Simone traced the differences with her pen. The pressure's inconsistent. The slant shifts midway through. That's not the same hand or not the same state of mind. I leaned closer, studying the signatures. The deed signature was confident, clear, each letter formed with care. The mortgage signature looked rushed, shaky, the letters compressed. Can you prove it wasn't her? A forensic document examiner can, and should, because this crosses into criminal territory. Simone's voice was level, but her eyes were hard. If that signature was forged, we're talking mortgage fraud. If it was coerced, if they had her sign without explaining what it was, that's fraud by deception. Either way, it's a felony. The room felt smaller suddenly, the implications pressing in. This wasn't just family exploitation anymore. This was organized theft with forged documents. If the signature was forged, I said carefully, who benefits from the loan? Simone pulled out a third document, bank statements, showing the loan proceeds. Constance and Dennis used it to pay down existing farm debt. Your daughter-in-law's property secured their loan, and they used the money to solve their financial problems. They used her name to steal. Yes. I sat back, processing. The unpaid labor was theft of services. The tax deductions were fraud. But this forging someone's signature to secure a mortgage on property they legally owned, this was a different magnitude entirely. How much total damage are we talking about? I asked. Simone consulted her notes. $200,000 in fraudulent mortgage debt now attached to Meadows' property. $60,000 in unpaid labor documented in their own records. $48,000 in fraudulent tax deductions. Plus whatever interest and penalties apply. We're approaching $350,000 in quantifiable theft and fraud. How do you forgive someone who doesn't just exploit your child who forges her name on legal documents? What do I do with this? I asked. Simone met my eyes. That depends on what you want. Civil lawsuit gets you money. Criminal complaint gets you justice. But Mrs. Caldwell, with evidence this clear, you could pursue both. I thought about Constance at that fire pit, barking orders at Meadow while everyone smiled and nodded. I thought about Willa's hollow eyes confessing to 3 years of the same systematic abuse. I thought about my granddaughter growing up thinking this was normal. I want justice, I said. Simone nodded and began gathering the documents into a folder. Then we're building a criminal case. I left her office with the manila folder containing felony evidence. The notebook I'd been keeping wasn't just documentation for a lawyer anymore, it was evidence for a prosecutor. And somewhere in that farmhouse, Constance had no idea that her perfect system just became a prison sentence. When did my daughter-in-law learn to look at me like I'm a liar? 6 days after Simone handed me felony evidence. I still hadn't figured out how to tell Meadow that her family was stealing from her with forged documents. But I needed one more piece of information confirmation that she'd never knowingly signed that mortgage. I brought cookies for Nell and found Meadow alone in the kitchen, folding laundry at the table. I was just wondering, I said casually, setting the cookie tin down. When you and Dennis got married, did you receive any property as a gift? Meadow's hands stilled on a towel. The south parcel. Why do you ask? Oh, just trying to keep family history straight in my head. You know how memory goes at my age. She resumed folding, but her movements were more deliberate now. Your memory seems fine to me. I poured myself tea from the pot on the counter. Buying time. And did you have to sign any paperwork for that transfer documents? That sort of thing. At the time, yes. Mom, is there something specific you're trying to find out? Just curious about how property transfers work in farm families. Different from town life, I imagine. Meadow set down the towel and looked at me directly. You've asked me about property documents 3 times in 14 days. That's not forgetfulness. My teacup rattled slightly against the saucer as I set it down. Is it 3? I suppose I'm more scattered than I thought. You're the least scattered person I know. Her voice was level, but her eyes were sharp. First you asked whose name was on the mortgage. Then you asked what documents I signed at the wedding. Now you're asking about property transfers. What are you looking for? Building a case without the victim's knowledge is like planning a rescue for someone who doesn't know they're drowning. I'm not looking for anything specific, I said, and heard how hollow the lie sounded even as I spoke it. I just worry about you sometimes. Worry about me how? I pivoted, hoping honesty in one direction would mask deception in another. You work so hard here. I just want to make sure you're being treated fairly. Meadow's expression shuddered like a door slamming. That's between Dennis and me. Of course, I didn't mean to overstep. But you are overstepping. She stood, gathering the folded laundry into a basket. Whatever you're investigating, and don't tell me you're not investigating something, it's my life, not yours. I'm your mother-in-law. I care about... I know you care. Her voice softened slightly, but the wariness remained. But you're asking questions like a detective, not a concerned parent, and you're not telling me why. The truth sat between us like a third chair no one would sit in. I could tell her about the mortgage fraud, the stolen labor, the tax deductions. I could show her Simone's evidence and Willa's confession. But standing in that kitchen, watching her defensive posture and exhausted eyes, I realized she wasn't ready to hear it. Or maybe she already knew and couldn't face it yet. I'm just worried, I said again, weakly. Meadow picked up the laundry basket, balancing it against her hip. At the doorway, she turned back. Mom, what are you hiding from me? I opened my mouth. Closed it. The evidence was in my car manila folder full of fraud and theft and forged signatures. But the woman in front of me had spent 3 years being gaslit by people who claimed to love her. How could I expect her to believe that her husband and mother-in-law had been systematically robbing her? Nothing, I lied. I'm not hiding anything. Meadow stared at me for 3 long seconds. The same skeptical look I'd seen on Constance's face when my phone beeped. Then she left without another word. I drove home with her question ringing in my ears. She knew I was investigating something. But not what, and her shuttered expression when I mentioned fair compensation told me she wasn't ready to face the truth. My timeline just collapsed. Either I confront the family with incomplete evidence, or I risk Meadow warning Dennis that his mother is asking questions. Constance opens the door 3 inches and doesn't invite me in. Meadow's suspicion had given me a week to decide confront or retreat, but I hadn't expected the decision to be made for me. "Lorraine," Constance said, her voice perfectly pleasant and completely cold. "What brings you by?" "I thought I'd see Nell. Maybe take her for ice cream." "She's doing homework." Constance didn't move from the doorway. "You've become quite the regular visitor lately." I adjusted my purse on my shoulder, feeling the weight of the locked phone inside 14 photos, 7 recordings, all the evidence I'd gathered before Meadow noticed. "I've been missing Nell and checking in on Meadow." "Funny, Meadow mentioned you've been asking her unusual questions." The air between us shifted, no more pretense. "Just grandmother curiosity," I said lightly. "About property documents, mortgages, legal paperwork." Constance tilted her head, her smile sharp. "That's not curiosity. That's investigation." I said nothing, calculating how much she knew versus how much she suspected. "You've visited 4 times in the past month," Constance continued. "Before March, we saw you quarterly. Suddenly you're here every week, fumbling with your phone in my office, asking Meadow about signatures, chatting up Nell about family finances." She'd been tracking every visit, every question, cataloged and analyzed. "I care about my granddaughters," I said carefully. "And apparently about Simone Mercer's professional services." Constance's eyes went flint hard. "Someone saw you coming out of her office, twice. Why would you need a forensic accountant?" "Lorraine, small town, big problem." "Estate planning," I said, keeping my voice steady. Vernon suggested she could help with some financial questions. "Estate planning doesn't usually involve questions about other people's mortgages." The accusation hung between us, she knew. Not everything she couldn't know about the forged signature analysis or Willa's confession, but enough to recognize threat. "I don't know what you're implying," I said. "I'm implying that you've been poking around in family business that doesn't concern you." Constance's pleasant mask slipped entirely. "This is my farm, my son's marriage, my operation, and you've been treating it like a crime scene." "If there's nothing wrong, why are you so defensive?" "If there's something wrong, why haven't you asked me directly instead of sneaking around interrogating my daughter-in-law and hiring investigators?" "Because you're the criminal," I thought but didn't say. "Because the evidence says you forged Meadow's signature and stole 3 years of her labor and claimed it all on your taxes." "I think it's best if you call before visiting from now on," Constance said, her tone returning to false politeness. "I'm family. I shouldn't need an appointment to see my granddaughter." "Family respects boundaries." "Family doesn't go digging through other people's business, hiring accountants to investigate them, asking strange questions designed to catch people in lies." Footsteps behind Constance Nell appearing in the hallway. "Grandma." "Nell, go finish your homework," Constance said without turning. "But now." Nell retreated, confusion and disappointment on her face. Constance watched her go, then turned back to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're done here," she said. "Constance." "We're done, Lorraine. Whatever you think you've found, whatever you think you know, stay out of my family's private affairs. Is that clear?" "How do you fight someone who controls access to everyone you're trying to protect?" "Crystal," I said quietly. The door closed with Constance's eyes still visible through the narrow gap, watchful, calculating, territorial. She knew I knew something, even if she didn't know what. My window for quiet investigation just slammed shut. I walked back to my car on legs that felt steadier than they should have. Constance had just shown her hand panic disguised as authority, control masking fear. She wouldn't have restricted my access if she felt secure. She wouldn't have confronted me if she thought I'd back down. She'd made her move. Now I had to make mine. Whatever I did next, it wouldn't be subtle. I spread my retirement account statements across the kitchen table at midnight and do the math that will end Constance Ashford. Subtle was over. Constance had blocked my access, warned me off, made clear that quiet investigation was finished. So I'd come home and opened the filing cabinet I hadn't touched in months, the one containing 35 years of a math teacher's careful financial planning. Pension fund, $847,000. Investment accounts, $1,340,000. Savings and bonds, $613,000. Total liquid assets, $2. $8 million, built dollar by dollar through decades of brown bag lunches and used cars and skipped vacations. Constance thought I was poor. She'd dismissed me as a retired teacher scraping by on Social Security, harmless and irrelevant. She was wrong. I pulled out Simone's report. Farm debt $1.6 million, held by Millbrook Community Bank. Vernon Sinclair, president. The man who'd called me months ago to warn about foreclosure. The man who might sell me the debt. I picked up my phone. 10:47 p.m. late, but what I was planning couldn't wait for business hours. Vernon answered on the third ring, voice rough with sleep. Lorraine, I'm sorry to call so late. I have a question that can't wait. Are you all right? Can a private individual purchase the Ashford farm debt from your bank? Silence stretched across the line. Then, Lorraine, you're talking about becoming their creditor. I'm talking about owning the leverage they've been using to destroy my family. More silence. I heard him moving, probably leaving the bedroom so he wouldn't wake his wife. It's legally possible, he said finally. Banks sell distressed debt regularly. Agricultural loans especially. We'd rather have someone local manage collection than foreclose an auction. But Lorraine, do you understand what you're asking? I have $2.8 million in liquid assets. The farm owes $1.6. I can buy the debt and still have comfortable retirement. This isn't about money. This is about power, I finished. Yes, it is. They'd built their empire on stolen labor. I'd built mine on frugal discipline and compound interest. Vernon exhaled slowly. If you own the debt, you control the foreclosure timeline. You could force negotiation, restructure terms, demand payment in full. You'd have legal authority to audit their books, inspect operations, challenge their use of the property. And with the criminal fraud evidence Simone documented, you'd have them in a vice. Face prosecution for mortgage fraud and labor theft, or negotiate a settlement that gives you everything you want. I want Meadow freed from that farm with full compensation for 3 years of stolen work. I want Nell protected from watching her mother be exploited. I want Constance to understand that stealing from vulnerable women has consequences. This is a nuclear option, Lorraine. Good. They built a system to exploit vulnerable women. I'm buying the system. I heard papers rustling on Vernon's end. The bank board would need to approve the sale, he said. But given the farm's financial instability and your ability to purchase at full value, I can present it as sound business. Reducing bank risk, keeping the debt local, avoiding expensive foreclosure proceedings. How long? I'll have preliminary numbers by Friday. Full board approval could take 2 weeks. Math teacher versus farm matriarch. The numbers don't lie. Vernon, I said quietly, thank you. You're going to war with your son's family. I'm going to war with people who've been stealing from my daughter-in-law for 3 years and forged her name on legal documents. That they happen to be family doesn't make them less criminal. He was quiet for a moment. Friday, he said finally. I'll call you Friday. I hung up and looked at the documents spread across my table, their debt, my savings. Constance thought she controlled the board because she owned the land. But debt is ownership too, the kind with legal teeth. By Friday, I'd know if I could buy the chains they'd been using to bind Meadow. 35 years of teaching, 35 years of saving, and every dollar was about to become ammunition. Vernon slides the debt portfolio across his desk before his secretary has even closed the door. Friday had arrived. The question I'd been holding all week, whether the bank would sell me the chains binding Meadow, was about to be answered. The board met yesterday, Vernon said, settling into his chair. You're approved as a qualified buyer. I opened the portfolio. 3 loan agreements, payment histories, collateral descriptions. $1.6 million in debt secured by 320 acres of farmland, equipment, and structures. They're 60 days past due on the second mortgage, Vernon continued. The board wants this resolved before we hit 90 days and trigger mandatory collection procedures. What's your asking price for the portfolio? $1.4 million a discount, reflecting the collection risk and our desire to avoid foreclosure costs. But you'd own $1.6 in principal plus accumulated interest. The math was simple. I could purchase their debt for $200,000 less than face value, immediately gaining leverage worth more than I'd pay. The structure would be straightforward, Vernon said, sliding another document across. You create an LLC to purchase the debt. Maintains your privacy, provides legal protection. The LLC becomes the secured creditor with full rights payment enforcement, collateral inspection, foreclosure if necessary. The purchase would be confidential until you choose to notify the debtors. Legally, you have 30 days after closing to inform them of the creditor change. But there's no requirement to notify before closing, meaning Constance would have no warning, no time to transfer assets, hide money, or create defensive structures. 1.4 million, 35 years. Worth it. How quickly can this close? I asked. 10 business days once you commit and provide proof of funds. My attorney can prepare documents by Monday. Wire transfer verification takes 3 days. Final closing June 6th. 10 days. That's June 6th. I want this locked before they can react. Vernon studied me for a long moment. You're certain about this once you purchase the debt. You'll own the same leverage over them that they've used to keep Meadow trapped. It's a nuclear option. Lorraine? It's the only option that gives me equal power. Right now, Constance controls access to my granddaughter, controls whether Meadow can leave. Controls everything because she holds the money and the land. If I own the debt, she can't ignore me anymore. He nodded slowly and pulled out a letter of intent. This commits you to purchase at the agreed price, contingent on final documentation. I'll need $100,000 in earnest money to take the portfolio off the market. I signed without hesitation and pulled out my phone to initiate the wire transfer. $100,000 from my retirement account to Plymouth Community Bank's escrow. The transaction completed with 3 taps. Vernon's phone chimed with the confirmation. He glanced at it, then back at me with something like respect. The closing documents will be ready Wednesday, he said. Final signing June 6th at 10 a.m. You'll need to wire the remaining $1.3 million by 9 a.m. that morning. I'll be here at 9:30. Lorraine, he said carefully, you understand what this means if they miss payments after you own the debt. You could foreclose. Take the farm, everything. How long had Constance felt untouchable because she owned the land? I understand I'm buying the leverage Constance used to steal from my family, I said quietly. What I do with it after closing is between me and them. Vernon handed me a copy of the letter of intent. Closing is June 6th. After that, you own them. I walked out of his office with the receipt for my deposit and a timeline. 10 days until closing. 10 days until I stopped being a powerless grandmother and became their creditor. Constance was busy restricting my access to the farm, convinced she'd won by shutting me out. She didn't know I wasn't trying to get in anymore. I was buying the mortgage that kept her there. The papers spread across Constance's dining table might as well be a trap with teeth. I didn't see them myself. Constance had made sure I couldn't set foot on the farm. But Meadow's text came through at 8 p.m. on June 3rd, 3 days before my debt purchase would close. Family meeting, documents. Need to call you. She called from her car, voice shaking. Constance called a mandatory meeting, Meadow said. Dennis and me. Attorney prepared papers spread across the table like we were signing a business deal. What kind of papers? Power of attorney. She said it's routine estate planning, streamlining farm decisions, protecting everyone's interests. Meadow's breath hitched. Mom, why would she need power of attorney over my property? Because she knows something's wrong, I thought. Because she's sensed the threat and she's trying to consolidate control before she loses it. What did she say when you asked? That it's not my property, it's family property. That this just makes everything cleaner. Her exact words. The land was legally Meadow's, wedding gift from Dennis's late father, transferred 3 years ago. But Constance had already forged Meadow's signature once on a mortgage. Now she wanted legal authority to sign anything in Meadow's name. Did you sign? Not yet. She said it's needed for banking purposes and to protect Nell's inheritance. Dennis backed her up, said the bank requires unified management documentation. Of course he did. Dennis had been raised to believe his mother's word was law. I asked if I could have a lawyer review it first. Meadow continued. Constance said we don't need to waste money on lawyers for simple family paperwork. Then she asked. Her voice broke. She asked if I trust this family or not. Power of attorney. 2 words that sound like protection, but taste like surrender. What did you tell her? That I want to read everything carefully, that I'll bring it back tomorrow. Meadow exhaled shakily. She didn't like that. Her jaw got tight, like when she's furious but trying to hide it. But she let me take the documents overnight. Said she needs my signature by tomorrow, that they have to be filed by Friday. Friday, June 6th, the day my debt purchase would close. Constance didn't know about the debt transaction, couldn't know, but she'd sensed something shifting. Maybe Dennis had mentioned the bank was behaving strangely. Maybe someone had seen me at Vernon's office more than once. Whatever triggered her instinct, she was scrambling to secure control before losing it. "Meadow," I said carefully, "but do not sign those papers." "But if I don't, Constance will?" "Constance will. What be angry she's been stealing from you for 3 years. Her anger is the least of your concerns." Silence on the line. Then, "How did you know she's been stealing?" "Because I've been investigating, and I'm 3 days away from having leverage that will end this." "What kind of leverage?" "The kind that means if you can stall signing until Friday, everything changes. Can you do that?" "I don't know. Dennis is already upset that I didn't just sign, and Constance said it has to be filed by Friday." "Then make her wait. Tell her you need to think. Tell her you want to pray about it. Tell her anything, but do not put your name on those documents. 72 hours, 3 days, rescue or ruin." "Okay," Meadow whispered. "I'll try." We hung up, and I sat in my kitchen with my own documents, the letter of intent for debt purchase. Closing scheduled for 10 a.m. Friday morning. By noon, I'd own the farm's mortgage. By evening, those power of attorney papers would be worthless because Constance wouldn't control the debt anymore. But only if Meadow could hold out 3 more days. She didn't know her mother-in-law suspected something. Didn't know I was 72 hours from owning the leverage. Didn't know that delaying until Friday meant the papers would be worthless. She only knew her hand wouldn't stop shaking. Nell ambushes me at the farm gate before Constance can intercept, bubbling with news about the party. Meadow had held out. She'd stalled on signing the power of attorney documents until Friday. And by then, my debt purchase had closed. The papers were worthless now, though Constance didn't know it yet. I owned the farm's mortgage, held the leverage, and was waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Apparently, that moment was about to choose itself. "Grandma." Nell ran across the yard, pigtails flying. "Did you hear about the party?" I caught her in a hug, aware of Constance watching from the kitchen window. "What party?" "Sweetie. Mom and Dad's anniversary. 5 years. Grandma's inviting everyone, the Harrisons, the Becketts, even people from church." I kept my expression warm while my mind calculated. "That sounds like quite an event. When is it?" "June 28th, 3 weeks from Saturday. There's going to be a tent and catering and everything." Nell bounced on her toes. "Mom says it's to celebrate 5 years, but Grandma Constance says it's to show everyone how strong our family is." Of course she did. Constance wanted to showcase proof that the farm was thriving, the family united, everything running smoothly under her management. A public display designed to counter any whispers about mistreatment or financial trouble. She was handing me a stage. "Will your mom and dad give speeches?" I asked. "Grandma says Dad will thank everyone for supporting the family farm. And she's going to talk about legacy and tradition and keeping the land in the family." Nell wrinkled her nose. "It sounds boring, but there'll be cake." I smiled and stroked her hair, but my thoughts were racing. Public venue. Witnesses from the entire community. Extended family who might have suspected something was wrong. Neighbors who'd probably noticed Meadow's exhaustion, the long hours, the way Constance commanded and Meadow obeyed. What better place to reveal exploitation than a celebration designed to hide it? "I imagine there will be surprises that day," I said quietly. June 28th gave me 18 days. 18 days to prepare a presentation that would expose 3 years of documented theft, mortgage fraud, and systematic abuse. 18 days to coordinate with Simone, consult attorneys, and decide exactly how much to reveal in public versus reserve for legal proceedings. Constance wanted to project strength. I would provide different revelation. "Grandma, are you okay?" Nell asked, tilting her head. I refocused on her concerned face and made a decision. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out the pocket watch my late husband's, engraved with his initials. Kept in my purse since his funeral 12 years ago. "I want you to have your grandfather's watch," I said, pressing it into her small hands. "Keep it safe for me." Nell's eyes went wide. "But this was special to you." "It still is. That's why I'm giving it to you." I closed her fingers around it gently. "Things are going to change soon. Sweetie, when they do, remember I did everything because I love you and your mother." "What kind of changes?" "The good kind, the hard kind, the kind that hurt before they heal." I kissed her forehead. "Can you trust me?" She nodded solemnly, clutching the watch. 18 days to build a case presentation. 18 days to plan the ending. Constance appeared on the porch, arms crossed. "Nell, come inside. Grandma Lorraine was just leaving." I stood slowly, Meeting Constance's cold stare across the yard, she thought she'd won by restricting my access. She thought the unsigned power of attorney papers were just a temporary setback. She thought planning a big anniversary party would cement the family's public image. She didn't know I owned the debt now, didn't know every word spoken at that party would be heard by witnesses who could later testify. Didn't know June 28th wasn't going to be the celebration she'd planned. I drove away with the date circled mentally in red. They'd gather to celebrate an anniversary. They'd leave knowing exactly what kind of family Constance Ashford had built. The folder Simone pushes across her desk is 3 inches thick and represents 3 years of theft. 13 days remained until the anniversary party. 13 days until I'd show everyone exactly what kind of family Constance had built. But first, I needed to understand exactly what weapon I was carrying. Everything is documented to forensic accounting standards, Simone said, opening the folder to reveal tabbed sections in different colors. Time logs, bank records, property documents, signature analysis. Each section cross-referenced and indexed. I ran my fingers over the tabs: unpaid labor, mortgage fraud, asset concealment, witness statements, supporting evidence. Walk me through it, I said. Simone pulled the folder closer, flipping to the first section. Unpaid labor documentation 3 years, 3,840 hours. Market rate calculations totaling $60,019.20. Every shift logged from their own records. She moved to the next tab. Mortgage fraud, $200,000 loan secured against property in Meadows' name without her informed consent. Signature analysis comparing authentic documents to the mortgage shows clear discrepancies, different pressure, different baseline, different mental state. Another tab. Hidden assets. Constance claimed poverty to justify unpaid family labor while maintaining $2.8 million in concealed investment accounts. Tax returns showing deductions for labor never compensated. Would this stand up in court? I asked. Criminal or civil? Your choice. The evidence is irrefutable. She turned to the supporting materials section, my photographs time-stamped and organized chronologically. Showing Meadow working at dawn, time logs posted in the equipment shed, work schedules documenting 80-plus hour weeks. My audio recordings transcribed with timestamps, each instance of verbal abuse cataloged. Witness statements from Willa Ashford, Simone continued, touching another tab. Documented testimony of her own 3-year exploitation under identical pattern, establishes systematic rather than isolated abuse. The final section showed a 3-year timeline week by week, hour by hour, calculating stolen labor against market rates, cross-referenced with bank deposits showing the farm's income while paying Meadow nothing. $60,000, $200,000. Numbers that end lives. The mortgage fraud alone is felony level, Simone said. Add labor exploitation and asset concealment, you have multiple criminal charges available. And if I don't want criminal prosecution, then you have leverage for any settlement terms you name. This evidence gives you complete control. Before I show you what I decided to do with that folder, are you still with me? Comment. A for public confrontation or B for criminal charges. And tell me your reason in 5 to 10 words. Quick note, what follows includes dramatized details for emotional impact. The message is what matters. I closed the folder carefully, feeling its weight. 3 years of Meadows' life compressed into indexed sections and tabbed evidence. 3 years of systematic theft now existing in irrefutable black and white. 3 years of her life in one folder, I said quietly. 3 years of systematic theft, Simone corrected. Now you decide what happens next. I stood, picking up the folder. It was heavier than it looked, not just paper and ink, but documented proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. No judge would ignore this. No jury would excuse it. No community member could claim they didn't understand. Truth has weight, 3 inches of paper. 3 years of stolen labor. June 28th, I said. That's when everyone finds out what Constance Ashford really is. Simone nodded. 13 days. Do you need anything else before then? Just this. I held up the folder. This is everything. I carried it to my car and placed it carefully on the passenger seat like it was explosive, which it was. 13 days until Constance would give her speech about family strength and legacy and keeping the land in the family. 13 days until she'd stand in front of neighbors and extended family and community members, projecting the image of benevolent matriarch. Then I'd open this folder and show them the receipts. Every hour stolen, every dollar hidden, every signature forged, every lie told. All of it documented to forensic standards, all of it irrefutable. All of it ready to destroy the facade Constance had spent 3 years no longer. If you counted Willa Building. The folder sat beside me as I drove home, 3 inches thick and heavy with truth. Constance thought the anniversary party would cement her control. She had no idea it would end it. The bank letter uses language Constance doesn't recognize, and that terrifies her more than she'll admit. I didn't learn about this until later. Willa called me that evening, voice shaking, but while I was securing my evidence. Constance was discovering something was wrong. She'd been reviewing bank correspondence in her office that afternoon, the kind of routine paperwork she usually skimmed. But something caught her eye in a standard monthly statement, unfamiliar terminology buried in the footnotes: debt portfolio transfer, third-party purchaser, closing documentation. According to Willa, who heard everything through the office's thin walls, Constance went very still. Then she started pulling files, mortgage agreements, payment schedules, correspondence going back 6 months. The mortgage she thought was with Plymouth Community Bank had changed hands. Someone had purchased the debt, and no one had notified her directly. She was finding this information buried in fine print, tucked into standard disclosures that most people never read. But Constance Ashford wasn't most people. She read every word. Willa said the office went silent for nearly 20 minutes while Constance cross-referenced dates and documents. Then came the sound of papers slamming on the desk. The debt transfer had closed June 6th. June 6th, 3 days after she'd tried to get Meadow's power of attorney. 1 week after Meadow had started asking suspicious questions. 2 weeks after Constance had confronted me at the door and restricted my access. June 6th. The day the ground shifted beneath her feet. Someone had been moving against her. Someone with enough money to purchase farm debt, enough sophistication to do it quietly, enough motivation to act while she was distracted by other threats. Willa heard Constance pick up the phone and dial Dennis's cell. Her voice came through the wall, clipped and controlled. "Office, now." Dennis arrived 10 minutes later. Confused and wary, Willa pressed herself against the wall of the adjacent room, listening. "Our mortgage isn't with the bank anymore," Constance said without preamble. "Someone bought it." "Banks sell debt all the time, Mom. It doesn't mean—" "The timing is too convenient. Right after your mother-in-law started asking questions. Right after Meadow suddenly developed a spine about signing paperwork." Silence. Then Dennis, uncertain. "You really think Lorraine could—" "I think someone saw weakness and is moving to exploit it." Constance's voice was ice. "Someone with access to financial resources. Someone who's been poking around asking about property documents and mortgages. Someone who was seen leaving a forensic accountant's office. But how would she—" "I don't know how. I don't know if it's her, but I know this: the debt changed hands June 6th. Whoever bought it now has leverage over this farm, and if they decide to call the loan or change terms, we're vulnerable." Willa heard papers rustling, drawers opening. "We secure everything," Constance continued. "Every property document, every contract, every piece of paper that gives us legal protection. You review every agreement we've signed, find weak points before whoever bought that debt finds them first." "Mom, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" "Your mother-in-law goes from quarterly visits to weekly surveillance. She hires a forensic accountant. She asks Meadow about signatures and documents. Then our debt mysteriously transfers to an unnamed third party." "Does that sound paranoid to you?" How had she missed it, the quiet mother-in-law becoming a threat? Dennis was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you want me to do?" "Everything I just said. And find out who bought that debt. Banks keep records. Someone at Plymouth Community knows." A sound Willa described as palm hitting desk hard. "Someone is coming for this farm," Constance said. "Find out who." When Willa told me all this over the phone, I felt cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Constance had figured it out. Not all of it. She didn't know I owned the debt yet, but enough to be frightened. 10 days until the anniversary party. 10 days until Constance would learn exactly who was coming for her farm. And why? The pen is already in Meadow's hand when Constance slides the final document across the table. I knew this moment was coming. Constance had discovered the debt purchase, suspected my involvement, and had 2 days before the anniversary party. Cornered animals bite, and Constance was cornered. So I'd been monitoring, calling Willa for updates, watching for signs of desperate moves. When Willa texted me at 3 p.m. that Constance had summoned Meadow and Dennis to the living room with new paperwork, I knew. I waited 15 minutes, then called. What Meadow told me later. Voice still shaking, Constance had presented a quitclaim deed. The document that would strip Meadow of legal rights to her wedding gift land parcel, the 15 acres her father-in-law had, transferred to her 3 years ago. The property Constance had already used as collateral for fraudulent loans. "The bank needs this signed today or we lose the refinancing option," Constance had said. her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd given orders for decades. Meadow had picked up the document with trembling hands. "But this says I'm giving up my land." "You're not giving it up, you're consolidating it. This protects Nell's future." Constance leaned forward. "Unless you don't care about your daughter's inheritance." The guilt weapon. The same blade Constance had used to extract 3 years of unpaid labor, turned now to steal property outright. Dennis stood behind his mother, adding his weight to the pressure through silence. 3 years of watching his wife exploited, and he'd never intervened. Why would he start now? Meadow's hand had held the pen above the signature line. She told me later she'd been too exhausted to fight anymore. 3 years of 4 a.m. starts and 9 p.m. finishes. 3 years of being told her work was never enough. Her exhaustion was weakness. Her questions were disrespect. 3 years of isolation from everyone who might tell her this wasn't normal. How many times can a person sign away pieces of themselves before nothing remains? Stop making this harder than it needs to be. Meadow, Dennis had said. I need to think. There's nothing to think about. Sign it, now. Constance's voice had gone cold, the voice that didn't accept refusal. Meadow had lowered the pen toward paper. That's when I called. Meadow's phone rang, my name flashing on the screen. Constance's head snapped up. Ignore it, she commanded. But Meadow, exhausted, cornered, desperate for any delay, answered anyway. Mom. Meadow. Listen to me carefully. I kept my voice calm. Certain. Do not sign anything they put in front of you. Mom, I don't understand. Constance says the bank... Whatever they're telling you is a lie. That document isn't protecting Nell's future, it's stealing yours. Put the pen down. But 2 days. Sweetheart, the anniversary party. Everything changes. I need you to trust me. I paused, letting certainty fill the silence. Can you hold on 2 more days? Meadow had gone quiet, across the table. Constance radiated fury. Dennis shifted uncomfortably. The unsigned quitclaim deed sat between them like a bomb. 2 days, Meadow repeated quietly. 48 hours? Then you'll understand everything. But right now, I need you to do something you haven't done in 3 years. What? Say no. 2 days, 48 hours, 1 phone call. Meadow told me what happened next. She set the pen down carefully, pushed the unsigned document back across the table, and looked at Constance, really looked at her. Not with the desperate-to-please exhaustion of someone who'd been systematically broken, but with something Constance didn't recognize. No, Meadow had said. Constance's face went white with rage. You're making a mistake! Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Get out, Constance said, voice shaking. Get out of my house. Meadow had walked out with the phone still in her hand, my voice in her ear telling her where to go, promising her that in 2 days she'd understand why this mattered. She didn't know what happens at the anniversary party. Didn't understand why I sounded so certain. But for the first time in 3 years, she'd found the word Constance had beaten out of her. Number. 2 days until Constance discovered why that word would cost her everything. Willa stands frozen in the hallway, watching Meadow crumple against the wall. And 9 years of silence finally cracks. She called me an hour later, voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her at first. But what she told me changed everything about tomorrow's confrontation. Meadow had stayed the night at Willa's apartment after refusing to sign. But she'd returned to the farm that morning to collect clothes for Nell, thinking Constance would be in town at the caterer's. She'd been wrong. Willa had been in the office when she heard Constance's voice echoing from the hallway, that particular tone Willa recognized from Nines, years of being its target. You ungrateful parasite! We gave you everything, and you repay us with betrayal. Willa had rounded the corner to find Meadow pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face, hands raised in unconscious defense. I'm sorry, Meadow's voice had been small, broken. You're weak, useless. No wonder your own mother has to fight your battles. Constance's words landed like physical blows. Do you know what you have done? Refusing to sign when the bank needed those documents, you've jeopardized everything this family has built. Willa told me she'd stood there frozen, watching Meadow collapse under verbal assault, the same words, the same tone, the same systematic destruction Constance had used on her years ago. Every line was familiar, every manipulation recognized. And something inside Willa that had been compressed for 9 years suddenly expanded. Stop! Her voice had cut through Constance's tirade. Just stop! Constance had turned, genuine shock on her face. Willa had never defied her, never interrupted, never challenged. This doesn't concern you, Willa. It concerns me because you did this exact thing to me. Willa's voice grew stronger with each word. The same words, the same cruelty. I recognize every line because I heard them for 3 years. Silence is a muscle the longer you hold it, the harder it is to release. Constance's expression had shifted from shock to calculation. You're confused. I helped you. You exploited me. Willa stepped closer to Meadow, physically inserting herself between survivor and abuser. You convinced me I was worthless, that no one else would want me, that I owed you my life for the privilege of working 80-hour weeks for no pay. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Willa's voice broke but held. I know what it feels like to be so exhausted you can't think straight, to apologize for existing, to believe you deserve nothing better because someone spent years telling you that you're not enough. Meadow had been staring at Willa with dawning recognition, the realization that she wasn't alone, that this had happened before, that the pattern was visible to someone who'd survived it. And tomorrow, Willa continued, everyone else will too. Constance went very still. What do you mean? Tomorrow? The anniversary party, when Lorraine reveals everything you've done. To me, to Meadow. All of it documented, all of it proven. 9 years, 1 sentence. Everything changed. You made me your victim, Willa said, voice finally breaking. I won't let you keep making new ones. When Willa described that moment to me over the phone, Constance speechless for perhaps the first time in her life. Meadow crying but standing straighter. Willa herself shaking with adrenaline and 9 years of suppressed rage finally released, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. I'd planned to be Meadow's only advocate tomorrow. Instead, I had an ally who'd survived the same system and was ready to testify. 2 victims becoming witnesses, 2 voices Constance couldn't silence. Willa told me she'd helped Meadow pack quickly, and they'd left together, survivors supporting each other. Walking away from the woman who'd broken them both. Constance had less than 24 hours before facing a coordinated attack from inside and outside her family. And now she knew it was coming. The string lights cast everything in golden warmth, making the lies look almost beautiful. Constance knew I was coming. Willa had told her yesterday that tonight would expose everything. But knowing a bomb is coming doesn't help when you're trapped by your own performance, and Constance had invited 30 witnesses to watch her play gracious matriarch. I arrived at 6:30, fashionably late, carrying a small, elegant handbag and wearing my best grandmother smile. The farmyard had been transformed. White tablecloths covered long tables arranged in a horseshoe. String lights wove through tree branches overhead, their warm glow softening the hard edges of buildings where Meadow had worked unpaid for 3 years. Flower arrangements probably expensive. Definitely ironic-centered each table. 30 guests mingled with wine glasses and appetizer plates. I recognized neighboring farm families. Church friends who'd probably wondered why Meadow always looked so tired. Extended relatives who'd accepted Constance's version of family devotion without question. Constance worked the crowd in a navy dress that probably cost more than Meadow's entire wardrobe, playing hostess with practiced grace. But I watched her eyes scan every new arrival, waiting for the threat she knew had arrived but couldn't yet identify. At the head table, Dennis and Meadow stood receiving congratulations. They looked like a portrait of marital happiness if you didn't notice Meadow's hollow eyes or the way her smile never reached past her lips. An older woman from church clasped Meadow's hands. 5 years, you two look as happy as your wedding day. We've been blessed with a strong family foundation, Dennis replied smoothly, his mother's words in his mouth. Constance materialized beside them, touching Dennis's shoulder with maternal pride. Family is everything. We take care of our own. The words hung in the evening air, beautiful and poisonous. I moved through the crowd, greeting people I'd met at Sunday dinners, accepting congratulations for my son's anniversary as though I'd come only to celebrate. Willa stood near the dessert table, avoiding Constance's gaze. Nell gripped her grandfather's watch in her small fist, eyes darting between adults who all seemed to be acting in a play she didn't understand. Celebration is just a stage set, beautiful until you look behind the curtain. Constance tapped her wine glass with a fork, calling for attention. Guests quieted, turned expectantly. To my son and daughter-in-law, she said, voice carrying across the yard. 5 years of marriage built on the foundation of family unity. May you have many more years of prosperity together. Glasses raised. People smiled, and Constance's eyes found mine across the crowd calculating. Warning. Desperate. I raised my glass with everyone else. Vernon Sinclair arrived as the toast concluded, his presence adding weight I'd planned carefully. The bank president attending a farm family's anniversary party. Witnesses would remember that detail later. "Beautiful evening for a party," Vernon said, greeting me with a nod that looked casual but wasn't. "Perfect weather," I agreed. We made our way to seats near the head table. Constance intercepted us with strained hospitality. "Lorraine, how generous of you to come. I wouldn't miss my son's anniversary," I said pleasantly. "We're family, after all." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I found my assigned seat close enough to the head table to be heard clearly. Far enough to let Constance think she still controlled the space. I set my handbag carefully beside my chair. Small, elegant, unassuming. Inside a 3-inch folder containing 3 years of documented theft. 1 handbag, 1 folder, 30 witnesses. I caught Meadow's eye and smiled. She moved closer under pretense of checking place settings, and I whispered as she leaned past "After dessert, stay strong." Her hand trembled, but she nodded. Servers began bringing out the first course. Guests settled into their seats with pleasant chatter about the weather, the decorations, how grown-up Nell was getting. Constance presided from the head table, smiling like someone who'd built something worth celebrating. My handbag sat beside my chair like a grenade with the pin half pulled. After dessert, I'd detonate it in front of everyone she'd invited to witness her victory. I stand during the pause between dessert and coffee, and the scrape of my chair silences conversation. Dessert plates had been cleared. Servers hovered with coffee pots, waiting for Constance's signal to proceed. This was the pause I'd planned for the natural break when guests shift from eating to lingering, when attention drifts and resets. Perfect moment to claim it. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment. My voice carried across the yard with the calm authority of someone who'd commanded classrooms for 35 years. As Dennis's mother, I'd like to say a few words. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman from church smiled warmly. Of course family speeches are the best part. At the head table, Constance's knuckles went white around her wine glass. She knew. But social convention had her trapped. Refusing to let a family member speak at her own son's anniversary would create exactly the scene she'd spent 3 years avoiding. She forced a gracious smile. "How lovely. Please, Lorraine, go ahead." The yard settled into attentive quiet. 30 faces turned toward me with polite expectation. Vernon Sinclair shifted slightly in his seat. He knew what was coming. Meadow looked confused, almost frightened. At the periphery, Willa met my eyes with something like relief. Dennis smiled indulgently. "Mom's gonna give one of her teacher speeches," he said to the guest beside him. Nell gripped her grandfather's watch, watching me with the absolute trust only grandchildren possess. Constance sat very still, calculating whether she could interrupt. Realizing she couldn't without exposing exactly the kind of control she'd been pretending didn't exist. 30 faces, 1 folder, no turning back. "Thank you, Constance, for allowing me this moment." I kept my tone warm, grandmother appropriate. "You've created quite an event here. The whole community gathered to celebrate family." "We believe in honoring our commitments," Constance replied, voice strained around the edges. "Yes, commitments." I let the word sit. That's actually what I want to talk about today. The commitments we make to family. The ones we keep and the ones we break. The atmosphere shifted slightly. People who'd expected heartwarming anecdote sensed something else emerging. Meadow whispered to Willa, "What is she doing?" Willa whispered back, "What she should have done 3 years ago?" I reached for my handbag. The movement was deliberate, unhurried. Every eye tracked its simple gesture transformed into focus through timing and context. I'd taught long enough to know how to command a room's attention, how to make people lean forward rather than check out. Constance's face drained from pink hostess glow to ash white. She knew what was in that bag, knew what I was about to do. But stopping me now would mean standing up, crossing the yard, physically interrupting, creating the exact confrontation she'd built her entire system to avoid. Social convention held her in place like chains. My hand closed around the folder. 3 inches thick, professionally bound, tabbed sections visible even before I pulled it fully into view. I'd spent $3,000 having this prepared to litigation standards, worth every penny. 5 years ago, my son married Meadow. I held the folder where everyone could see it. It should have been the beginning of a partnership. Instead, it became something else entirely. Constance's voice cracked slightly. "Lorraine, perhaps we should celebrate their anniversary by being honest." I met her eyes across the yard. "I agree completely." How long does it take to destroy someone's reputation? The answer is 1 folder. 3 minutes. 30 witnesses. This folder contains 3 years of documented evidence, I said calmly. Financial records, time logs, witness statements. Audio recordings. Everything needed to prove that this family— I paused. Letting the word resonate, has been systematically exploiting my daughter-in-law as unpaid labor while concealing significant assets and committing mortgage fraud. The silence that fell was absolute. No polite murmurs, no wine glasses clinking. Just 30 people realizing the heartwarming family speech had become something else entirely. Constance started to rise. Vernon touched her arm gently, shaking his head. "Sit down," the gesture said. "Let it happen." She sank back into her chair. Trapped. They were about to get truth instead of anecdote. I opened the folder and began reading dollar amounts like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. For 3 years, my daughter-in-law has worked this farm without wages. I pull out the first section time logs, each page time-stamped and cross-referenced. Not reduced wages, not delayed compensation. 0 payment for 3,840 documented hours of labor. Polite attention shifts, faces that had been smiling now look uncertain. I hold up a photograph meadow at 4:30 a.m., feeding cattle in winter darkness. The timestamp is clear. Dawn milking, 6 days a week, equipment maintenance, animal care, facility cleaning, all documented in the farm's own records. Another photograph, meadow carrying feed bags that probably weighed half what she does. At Wisconsin's prevailing market rate for skilled farm labor. The value of stolen wages totals $60,019.20. The number hangs in the air like smoke. Constance's voice cuts across the yard. "This is private family business. Wage theft is criminal business," I reply calmly. "Let me continue." I turn to the second section, pulling out mortgage documents. 18 months ago, someone secured a $200,000 loan using property that legally belongs to Meadow, a wedding gift from Dennis's late father. I hold up 2 signature samples side by side, one authentic, one from the mortgage. The signatures don't match. Either this was forged, or my daughter-in-law was coerced into signing documents she didn't understand. Vernon Sinclair nods from his seat. His confirmation as bank president carries weight everyone recognizes. A guest whispers to her husband, "That's fraud. That's actual fraud." Constance stands abruptly, chair scraping. "You have no right to air family matters in front of witnesses." I meet her eyes. "That's precisely why I'm doing this here, so everyone knows. So no one can pretend they didn't see. 60,000, 200,000, 9 years, 2 victims. The loan proceeds were used to pay down existing farm debt." I continue. "Constance and Dennis benefited financially. Meadow received nothing and now has debt attached to her property without her consent." Meadow has started crying quietly. Willa moves to stand beside her chair. I turn to the final section. My hands are steady. "Some of you might think this is a misunderstanding. Family dynamics gone wrong. A one-time mistake." I look directly at Constance. It's not. Before Meadow, there was Willa. I gesture to where she stands. Dennis's first fiancée. 3 years of identical exploitation, unpaid labor, financial control, systematic abuse, the same tactics, the same theft, the same lies about family contribution. Willa's voice shakes but holds. "Everything she said is true. Constance did it to me first." The yard has gone from festive to funereal. People stare at Constance like they're seeing her for the first time. "You're destroying this family." Constance's voice cracks with rage and desperation. "No." I close the folder carefully. "I'm saving it by showing what it actually is." Meadow sobs openly now. Years of suppressed grief finally released. Willa wraps arms around her while guests watch with expressions ranging from horror to pity to dawning understanding. Neighbors who'd probably wondered why Meadow looked so exhausted. Church friends who'd noticed but didn't ask. Family members who'd accepted Constance's narrative without question. They all see it now. Truth doesn't explode, it spreads like ink in water, staining everything it touches. Dennis sits frozen, looking between his mother and his wife like he's trying to solve an equation that doesn't balance. His face has gone pale. Nell clutches her grandfather's watch, tears streaming down her young face. She doesn't fully understand what's happening, but knows her family is fracturing in front of 30 witnesses. Constance stands at the head table, decades of carefully constructed authority crumbling. Her mouth opens, closes, opens again. For perhaps the first time in her life, she has no response that won't make things worse. The folder sits open on my table, pages visible to anyone who wants verification. Every number documented, every claim proven, every lie exposed. The party is over. The reckoning has begun. Constance recovers enough to attack, voice sharp with desperation disguised as contempt. The reckoning had begun, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Years of controlling everything through force of will don't die easily. She stands, drawing herself to full height, and addresses the crowd rather than me. You're listening to lies from a bitter old woman, a retired teacher with fantasies and grudges. Some guests shift uncomfortably. Others stare at her with dawning disgust. These accusations are absurd, Constance continues, voice gaining false confidence. Family helping family isn't exploitation. And even if she laughs, brittle and harsh, even if any of this fantasy were true, what exactly do you think you can do about it? She turns to face me directly. You're just a teacher. What power do you have? What recourse you've embarrassed yourself in front of everyone who matters? The dismissal is absolute, the contempt complete. I smile. I'm glad you asked. I reach into my handbag and pull out the second folder, smaller than the evidence package, but infinitely more devastating. Vernon shifts forward in his seat. Ready. 10 days ago, I say clearly, I purchased your debt from the bank, all $1.6 million of it. The silence is different now, not shocked, shattered. Constance's face goes from flushed to pale in seconds. That's impossible. It's completely legal. Vernon Sinclair stands, his presence as bank president adding official weight. The transaction closed June 6th. Mrs. Caldwell now holds your mortgage, all of it. I watch understanding spread through the crowd. The dismissed teacher with no power is their creditor. The woman Constance built her empire on exploiting now owns the debt that keeps that empire standing. $1.6 million, June 6th, purchased. You can't, Constance's voice cracks. How could you possibly? 35 years of teaching. I place the debt purchase agreement on the table beside the evidence folder. 35 years of brown bag lunches and used cars and careful savings. I have $2.8 million in liquid assets. Buying your debt cost me exactly half my retirement fund. Dennis has gone white. He's finally understanding what his mother's contempt for my modest teacher's pension, missed that modest means. Invested with discipline. Accumulates differently than flashy spending. Worth every penny, I add. Constance sinks back into her chair like someone's cut her strings. So to answer your question about what I can do, I continue calmly. I can do quite a lot. I don't just have evidence of crimes you committed. I have control of what happens next. I pull out one more document foreclosure rights paperwork that Vernon helped prepare. If mortgage payments aren't made on time, I can foreclose. If terms are violated, I can call the debt. If you attempt to transfer assets or hide money, I can take legal action as secured creditor. Meadow stares at me with something between shock and hope. I own the leverage you've been using to trap my family, I say, placing the final document on the table. The land you exploit people on, the operation you built on stolen labor, all of it exists because banks extended credit. And I bought that credit. What's more powerful, inherited land or the mortgage that owns it? Constance's mouth opens and closes. No words emerge. For perhaps the first time in decades, she has no response that changes the fundamental equation. Dennis finds his voice, shaking. Mom, is this true? Did you really? Shut up, Dennis, Constance snaps. But the command has no power anymore, just desperate rage. 35 years of teaching bought enough to buy your future, I say quietly. Every penny I saved while you dismissed me as irrelevant, every dollar I invested while you spent on appearances, all of it just purchased your mortgage. 2 documents sit on the table, now evidence of crimes committed. And proof of debt owned. Together, they represent complete reversal. The woman who called me powerless now faces someone who holds her farm's survival in her hands. 30 witnesses watch Constance Ashford discover that dismissing someone's modest means doesn't make their accumulated savings disappear. It just makes you blind to what they can do with it. Constance surges to her feet one more time, voice regaining command as she goes on offense. Blindness to accumulated savings had cost her leverage, but she still had something left: audacity. 3 decades of controlling narratives through sheer force of will. This is blackmail. Her voice rings across the yard with manufactured authority. She's trying to steal our family farm through manufactured accusations and financial manipulation. A few guests shift, uncertain. Constance seizes on it. Those documents are forgeries. We'll prove it in court. And when we do, we'll sue for defamation, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud, she points at Vernon. The bank president was clearly complicit in this scheme. Vernon doesn't flinch. He's faced down angry borrowers for 40 years. Elder abuse? I say calmly. I'm 65, you're 68. Try again. Every page is notarized, I continue. Every signature authenticated by forensic document examiner. Every dollar amount verified through bank records and tax filings. You're welcome to challenge any of it in court. I pause, letting the weight settle. But we both know you won't, because discovery would require you to produce your own documents. And those documents will confirm everything I've said. Constance's jaw tightens. She knows I'm right. But she has one card left. She turns to Dennis, voice shifting from commanding to pleading. Dennis, tell them this is all lies. Dennis stands frozen. I watch my son caught between the mother who raised him with absolute authority and the wife he's watched work herself to exhaustion. For 3 years. Meadow stares at him, tears streaming, not begging, just waiting. 30 people hold their breath. Some decisions take 3 seconds. Some change 3 years of wrong. Mom, Dennis starts, then stops. Constance steps toward him, hand extended. You know this is crazy. Your mother has always protected this family. Tell them. Please, Meadow whispers. Just tell the truth. Dennis looks at his mother, then at his wife, then down at his own hands like he's seeing them for the first time. When he speaks, his voice shakes, but it's clear. Mom, stop. Please just stop. Constance freezes. She's right, Dennis continues. Lorraine's right about all of it. The hours Meadow worked. The way his voice cracks. The way we treated her. Made her feel like she owed us everything while we paid her nothing. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Dennis moves to stand beside Meadow, takes her hand. I've watched you order her around for 3 years, watched her get thinner, more exhausted, more hollow. And I told myself it was normal, that this was how family worked. He turns to Meadow, tears on his face. I'm sorry, God, Meadow, I'm so sorry. I should have seen it, should have stopped it. Meadow sobs, gripping his hand. Dennis, you're making a mistake. Constance's voice has lost its command, turned desperate. The mistake was 3 years ago, Dennis says, when I let you convince me that unpaid labor was family contribution, that keeping my wife exhausted was building character, that your control was protection. He faces his mother directly. I choose Meadow. I should have chosen her 3 years ago. I'm choosing her now. A family is a structure when the cornerstone shifts. Everything either collapses or rebuilds stronger. Constance's face crumbles. Not with grief, with rage and disbelief that her own son would betray her in front of the community she'd spent decades impressing. After everything I've done for you, you exploited my wife, Dennis says quietly. You exploited Willa before her. And you would have kept doing it if someone hadn't stopped you. Willa steps forward, standing beside Dennis and Meadow. 3 people who'd survived or enabled Constance's system, now united against it. The space around Constance suddenly feels empty. Guests step back slightly, unconsciously distancing themselves from what she represents. I remain seated, evidence folder and debt papers still on the table. The matriarch who controlled everything through intimidation now stands alone, stripped of every structure she'd built. Her son has chosen his wife. The community has seen the truth. The leverage has shifted. She has nothing left but what everyone now sees clearly. I gesture toward a quieter corner of the yard away from remaining guests. And Constance follows like a defendant approaching sentencing. She has nothing left but what everyone now sees clearly. The question is what she'll do with that clarity. Dennis and Meadow follow. Willa stays close. This conversation needs witnesses, not for spectacle, but for accountability. I could foreclose, I say without preamble. The law is entirely on my side. You're 60 days past due on payments. I have documented criminal fraud. I could take this farm tomorrow. Constance's face is granite, but her hands shake. But that's not why I did this. I meet her eyes. I didn't buy your debt to destroy you. I bought it to stop you from destroying Meadow. Meadow stands beside Dennis, watching, waiting. So here are my terms, I continue. I'll restructure the debt at favorable interest rates. You keep the farm, but only if these conditions are met. I count them on my fingers. First, Meadow receives a formal employment contract, market rate salary, $55,000 annually for farm management work. Back pay negotiable through separate settlement. Dennis nods. Constance says nothing. Second, Meadow receives 30% ownership stake in farm operations, not as gift. As recognition of 3 years of unpaid labor that built equity she's entitled to. Meadow's breath catches. Third, equal voice in all business decisions. No more orders, no more commands, partnership or nothing. I pause. And fourth, you apologize publicly for what you did to Meadow and to Willa. Constance's voice is hoarse. You destroy everything I built. You built it on stolen labor, I say calmly. Now you rebuild it on fair terms, or you lose it. Choose. Is it mercy when terms are forced, or justice when they correct what should have been fair from the start. Dennis steps forward. Mom, accept the terms. It's more than fair given what you did. I built this farm. Constance's voice cracks. Decades of work. Built on backs you broke, Dennis says quietly. Lorraine's giving you a chance to keep it. Take it. Constance looks at each face her son who chose his wife. The daughter-in-law she exploited. The daughter she destroyed years earlier. The mother-in-law who outmaneuvered her completely. No allies left, no leverage remaining. Just terms that will strip her absolute control while leaving the farm standing. If I refuse, she asks. I foreclose within 30 days, I reply. The farm goes to auction. You lose everything. Meadow and Dennis start over somewhere else with settlement money from civil suit. Your choice. Silence stretches. Constance's shoulders sag. The defeat is total. I accept, she whispers. Say the rest, I prompt gently. Her voice barely carries. I'm sorry, Meadow. Meadow doesn't move, doesn't speak, just watches the woman who spent 3 years breaking her down now breaking herself. And to Willa, I add quietly, she deserves to hear it too. Willa steps closer, arms crossed. Constance's face crumbles further. Willa, I'm sorry for what I did to you. The apology is inadequate, forced, extracted under threat of total loss. But it's said, out loud, witnessed. Some apologies come too late to erase harm, but not too late to mark where healing starts. Willa nods once, not forgiveness, acknowledgement. Meadow remains silent for a long moment. Then she turns to Dennis. We need to discuss what our marriage looks like going forward, she says. Voice steady. Now that I'm an equal partner, in business and in everything else. Dennis takes her hand. Whatever you need, whatever makes this right. I watch Meadow stand straighter than she has in 3 years, shoulders back, eyes clear. The transformation is visible not just in posture, but in presence. The exploited daughter-in-law who arrived at dawn 3 years ago, believing family meant service, is gone. Someone new stands in her place, someone who knows her worth, someone who'll never accept less than fair treatment again. Constance sees it too, the permanent shift. Her power isn't suspended, it's redistributed. Meadow isn't freed from the farm, she's now part owner of it. The structure remains, but the foundation has been rebuilt on equity instead of exploitation. That was always the point. The attorney's office smells like leather and paper, the scent of promises being made permanent. That was always the point, not destroying the family structure, but rebuilding it on equity instead of exploitation. 1 week after the confrontation, we sit in this office to transform verbal agreements extracted under pressure into legally binding contracts that will protect Meadow for years to come. The attorney, a woman in her 50s named Margaret Ross who specializes in family business restructuring, spreads documents across the polished conference table. These documents formalize the ownership restructuring and employment terms agreed upon June 28th. She says, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who's seen families torn apart and rebuilt through legal paperwork. Meadow leans forward, studying the first page. 30%. That's real ownership. Real vote and decisions. Legally binding, Margaret confirms. You're a partner now, Mrs. Ashford. Not an employee, a co-owner with voting rights proportional to your stake. Any major operational decision requires your approval. I watch Meadow process this. 3 years of being ordered around, dismissed, exploited now codified protection that no one can strip away without her consent. The employment contract specifies $55,000 annually, Margaret continues, sliding another document across. Separate from ownership distributions. This is salary for farm management work. Dennis speaks for the first time since we arrived. I should have done this 3 years ago. Made you a real partner from the start. Meadow doesn't look at him. Yes, you should have. The truth sits between them. Neither kind nor cruel, just factual. Margaret produces the debt restructuring agreement. And this restructures the outstanding farm debt at 3.5% interest over 15 years. Manageable payments reflecting current market rates and farm income projections. Ownership isn't land, it's the signature that says you belong to yourself, not someone else's system. I sign first as creditor. The generous interest rate reflects what this was always about: correction, not punishment. Protection, not revenge. Dennis signs next, his signature acknowledging Meadow's ownership stake. Transferring power he should have shared from the beginning. Meadow picks up her copy of the employment contract. Reads slowly, carefully, every clause, every term, every protection. Take all the time you need, I say gently. No one's rushing you anymore. She reads for 10 minutes. Margaret waits patiently. Dennis fidgets. I remain still. 3 years of signing what Constance put in front of her without reading, without questioning, without understanding she had the right to refuse. That pattern ends here. Finally, Meadow sets down the contract. I understand everything this says. I agree to all terms. She picks up the pen Margaret offers. Her hand is steady, no trembling, no hesitation. She signs her name on the ownership transfer documents, clear, confident letters. Then the employment contract. Then the operating agreement establishing her voting rights. Margaret notarizes each signature with practiced efficiency. The embossed seals make everything official. My name, Meadow says quietly. My stake, my salary in writing. Congratulations, Mrs. Ashford. Margaret hands her the completed documents. You're now a 30% owner of Ashford Family Farm. Yeah? One signature, 3 years corrected, future rewritten. I meet Meadow's eyes across the table. No one can take it from you now. It's legally yours. She nods, gripping these papers like they're worth more than the land they describe which they are. These documents represent something the farm itself never could prove that she belongs to herself. The legal system that let Constance exploit you through property control now protects you through that same property. I explain. You're not just working the land, you own it, legally, irrevocably. Meadow stands, tucking the documents into her bag. When she straightens, her posture is different than it was even a week ago. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes clear. The woman who nearly signed away her rights under Constance's pressure is gone. The business owner with legal protections, market salary, and leverage stands in her place. We walk out of Margaret's office together. Dennis trails slightly behind, uncertain of his place in this new configuration. The exploitation chapter is closed. The question now is whether their marriage can survive being rebuilt on equality. Willa sits across from me at the farm kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it's the only solid thing in her world. The question of whether Meadow and Dennis's marriage can survive would be answered. But first, there was someone else who deserved restoration. 3 days after the legal signing, I'd invited Willa here for a private conversation. Not about the farm operations or the restructured dynamics, about her. Your testimony at the anniversary party was crucial, I begin. Standing against your mother, confirming the pattern, providing witness testimony that Meadow wasn't the only victim. Willa's grip tightens on the mug. I should have said something 3 years ago, when it started happening to Meadow. You said it when it mattered most, in front of everyone who needed to hear it. She looks down. I don't know if that makes up for... It doesn't have to make up for anything. I pull an envelope from my purse, but I want to offer you something anyway. Willa stares at the envelope like it might contain an eviction notice. You gave up accounting school when you came back to the farm, I say, 2 years into a 4-year program. I want to give you the chance to finish. I slide the envelope across the table. Inside acceptance letter from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's continuing education program. And a check covering full tuition for the remaining 2 years. Willa's hands shake as she opens it, reads the letter, sees the amount. I can't accept this. It's too much. You testified against the woman who destroyed 3 years of your life, I say firmly. This isn't charity. It's restitution for what you lost 9 years ago when no one helped you. But I'm not your responsibility. I'm not even... You're someone who should have been protected and wasn't. Someone who found courage anyway. I lean forward. Someone who helped prevent Constance from creating more victims in the future. Willa starts crying. Not gentle tears, harsh, broken sobs. Why would you do this for me? I'm not your daughter. I'm not even blood family. Because someone should have done it years ago. I reach across the table, cover her shaking hands with mine. You stood up when it mattered. You broke 9 years of silence. You confirmed a pattern that proved systematic exploitation. I watched it happen to Meadow for 3 years, and I didn't say anything. Guilt doesn't erase courage. Willa's silence for 3 years doesn't diminish her truth-telling when it counted. You were trapped too, I say gently. Financially, emotionally by history and trauma, but when the moment came, you chose truth. That's what I'm honoring. Footsteps behind me. Meadow enters from the hallway, eyes wet. She's been listening. She moves to Willa, pulls her out of the chair into an embrace. Willa collapses against her, sobbing. You're giving me back the future she took from me, Willa chokes out. We'll both have futures now, Meadow says, voice strong despite tears. Real ones, not the ones she designed for us. Not servant and victim, partners, equals. Survivors, Willa whispers. Yes, that too. I watch them hold each other, 2 women who suffered under the same system. now united in refusing to let that system define them permanently. Sisterhood isn't blood, it's choosing to stand beside someone when standing up costs everything. That's what justice looks like, I say quietly. Not just punishment for the abuser, restoration for the victims. Meadow pulls back slightly, still holding Willa's shoulders. You'll finish your degree. I'll run my share of the farm. And we'll both prove that what she tried to make us broken, dependent, powerless isn't what we actually are. Willa wipes her eyes with shaking hands, looking at the acceptance letter again. I don't know how to thank you. Succeed, I tell her. Graduate. Build the career she convinced you to abandon. Show every woman in a situation like yours that escape is possible and futures can be rebuilt. 3 women sit in the kitchen where Meadow once worked unpaid from dawn to dark, where Willa probably did the same years before. But the room feels different now, not a site of exploitation, but a planning space for futures. Constance's cycle of creating victims is permanently broken. What remains is helping those victims become something else entirely. The first family dinner since the anniversary confrontation feels like dining on a fault line, everyone moving carefully, testing whether the ground will hold. Helping victims become something else entirely starts with teaching former oppressors to see them differently. 2 weeks after Willa accepted her education funding, we gather for Sunday dinner. The first time everyone sits at the same table since June 28th. The seating has subtly shifted. Meadow sits at the table from the start. Not serving, not hovering, not waiting for orders. A chair. A plate, equal placement. Constance arrives last, moving slower than before. She's lost weight. The armor of absolute confidence has cracked, revealing someone smaller underneath, diminished but not broken. Nell bounces into her chair, oblivious to the adults' careful choreography. Daddy, I finished the first chapter. Tell everyone about your summer reading project, Dennis says, grateful for safe conversation. Nell launches into excited description of the book she's chosen. I watch faces around the table, everyone listening with exaggerated attention, avoiding harder topics. Then Nell stops mid-sentence, looks at Constance with the brutal directness only children possess. Grandma Constance, are you mad at us? The table goes silent. Constance sets down her fork carefully. No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. You seem sad. I'm sad about some things, but I'm working on being better. Meadow reaches across to touch Nell's hand. We're just learning how to be a family differently. Sweetie, sometimes that takes practice. Nell accepts this with a child's flexibility and returns to her book description. Midway through the meal, Constance rises to refill serving dishes from the kitchen. She returns with the casserole, moves around the table, and does something I've never seen her do. She serves Meadow first, before herself, before Dennis. The gesture lasts 3 seconds, but everyone notices. Constance sets the serving spoon down, voice quiet. Meadow, how are you? How are you feeling? Change doesn't arrive as transformation. It arrives as small, uncomfortable questions asked for the first time. Meadow looks up, genuinely surprised, takes a moment to decide how to respond. I'm better, thank you for asking. Good, Constance nods stiffly. That's good. It's awkward, stilted, but sincere. Willa catches my eye across the table. We both recognize what we're witnessing. Not redemption, but the first stumbling steps toward it. Later, as plates are being cleared, Dennis mentions the tractor needs work, major repair or replacement decision. Constance opens her mouth with the automatic authority of someone who's made every farm decision for decades, then stops. Catches herself. Turns to Meadow. Well, Meadow, you're co-owner now. What do you think we should do? The question hangs in the air. Everyone freezes. Meadow sets down the plates she was carrying, then realizes she doesn't have to carry plates anymore. Sits back down. I think we should get the estimate first. Compare repair cost to replacement. The tractor's old, but if we can get another 3 years from repairs, that's more economical than new. Constance considers this, actually considers it. That's sensible, she looks at Dennis. Call for the estimate. Redemption isn't grand gesture. It's diminished tyrant learning to say, what do you think? Dennis nods. I'll handle it tomorrow. The conversation moves on, but something fundamental has shifted. Meadow's opinion wasn't just legally entitled. It was actually solicited, actually heard, actually respected. Willa helps Meadow with dishes afterward. Constance doesn't stop them or redirect. She sits at the table with coffee, quiet, processing her new reality. I watch my former enemy learn to share power one uncomfortable question at a time. It's not dramatic. It's not enough to erase years of harm, but it's real. Nell approaches Meadow later in the kitchen, voice low. Is Grandma Constant's going to be nice now. Meadow dries her hands, kneels to Nell's height. I don't know, sweetie, but she's trying. Sometimes that's enough to start with. The meal ends without explosion, without backsliding, without Constance reasserting dominance. The ground holds. Small changes. Imperfect progress. But the fault line isn't splitting. It's settling into new foundation. And that, I realize, is what justice looks like after the verdict, not perfect transformation, but genuine effort to become something better than what you were. 3 days after that first family dinner, I'm back in my cottage garden in Fond du Lac, kneeling in the dirt between tomato plants. The quiet feels earned now, not retirement's slow fade, but the silence after battle when the artillery finally stops. My hands work the soil around a Cherokee purple, pruning suckers and checking for hornworms. Simple work, predictable work. The kind of afternoon where nothing explodes and nobody needs saving. Then Meadow's car pulls into my driveway at 2:15. I stand, brushing dirt from my knees, watching her step out. She's wearing clean jeans and a blue cotton shirt without stains. Her hair is pulled back in a neat ponytail. She walks toward me with relaxed confidence instead of exhausted compliance. No permission slip required, no stolen hours, just a woman visiting her mother-in-law on a Tuesday afternoon because she wants to. I took the afternoon off, Meadow says, smiling. Dennis is handling the equipment delivery. You look rested, I observe. She nods, and something in her face has fundamentally shifted. I am. For the first time in 3 years, I actually am. We settle onto my porch with iced tea, the sweet kind I make with real sugar and fresh mint from the garden. Meadow sips hers slowly, not gulping it down before racing back to unpaid labor. She has time now. She has choice. How's it going? I ask. Really going. Weird, she admits. Good weird, but weird. Yesterday, Constance asked me to approve a feed supplier purchase. Actually asked my opinion and waited for my answer. I almost fell over. She's learning. She doesn't have a choice. The contract's ironclad, and Dennis backs me up now. Meadow sets her glass down. Last night, he told his mother that I have veto power on all major decisions. To her face, in front of Nell. How'd Constance take it? Like swallowing glass. But she nodded and moved on. Meadow meets my eyes. It's working. Lorraine. The structure you forced on them? It's actually working. Justice isn't always thunder and revelation. Sometimes it's the quiet afternoon when the victim can finally rest. I reach over and squeeze her hand. You're doing the hard part now. Holding the boundary. Enforcing the terms. That takes more courage than signing documents. I know. She squeezes back. But I have backup now. I have salary proof in my bank account and ownership papers in my desk drawer and Dennis choosing me over his mother's manipulation. I finally have leverage. You always deserved it. Maybe, but deserving doesn't matter without power to enforce it. And she smiles, a real smile, not the performance mask I saw in her kitchen months ago. Thank you for everything you did. For believing I deserved better when I'd stopped believing it myself. You always did. You just needed leverage to claim it. Meadow's eyes well up. I finally feel like I can breathe. We sit in comfortable silence, watching bees work my lavender. The afternoon stretches long and golden, no urgency pulling her back to exploitation disguised as family duty. She stays for an hour, talking about ordinary things, Nell's new boyfriend, the corn yield projections, whether I want zucchini from the garden. Equal conversation between equals, no rescue required. The best revenge is watching someone you saved learn to save themselves. When Meadow finally leaves, she hugs me tight on the porch. I'll call you this weekend, she promises. Not asking permission, just making plans. I watch her drive away, back to the farm where she now has voice, salary, ownership, and respect. Back to the life she rebuilt with legal contracts and enforced boundaries. I return to my garden with dirt under my fingernails and peace in my chest. 35 years of teaching mathematics bought me retirement. 3 months of strategic war bought my daughter-in-law her freedom. Worth every penny, worth every risk. Meadow leaves after an hour, driving back to the farm where she now has voice, salary, ownership, and respect. I return to my garden with dirt under my fingernails and peace in my chest. 35 years of teaching bought me retirement. 3 months of strategic war bought my daughter-in-law her freedom. Worth every penny, worth every risk. 3 days of garden peace taught me I needed to see the farm one last time at the hour it all began. On July 18th, I drive through pre-dawn darkness, arriving at 6 a.m. The same brutal hour I first saw Meadow 3 months ago, exhausted in the milking barn. I park where my car won't be noticed, Walk quietly to the fence line with a view of barn and house. The farm looks the same. White clapboard, red barn, chicken coops, but everything is different. Meadow emerges at 6:15 wearing clean work clothes and sturdy boots. Her hair is pulled back neatly. She carries a thermos and walks with unhurried confidence toward the barn. Not frantic compliance, but purposeful choice. She's here because morning shift needs coverage and she agreed to handle it, not because Constance commanded unpaid servitude. Dennis follows, also dressed for work. He catches up at the barn door, gestures toward the equipment shed, waits for her response. She nods. He heads that direction. Partnership, not dictatorship. Nell appears carrying a feed bucket toward the chicken coops, moving with teenager slowness but helping. Learning what healthy family contribution looks like when it's not weaponized labor extraction. The scene mirrors my first shocked arrival but inverted completely. Same dawn light, same farm, same family, everything transformed by legal contracts, enforced boundaries, and systematic dismantling of exploitation's infrastructure. Meadow works by choice now, earning $55,000 annually plus 30% ownership. Dennis consults rather than commands. Nell learns healthy models instead of inheriting Constance's pathology. The cycle broke because someone with resources and strategic brain deployed both without mercy. A lifetime of discipline is the loaded weapon you hope never to fire until you must. I don't announce my presence or interrupt their morning. This visit is verification, not reunion. Confirming the change is real, sustainable, woven into daily operations rather than performed for observers. I watch for 10 minutes, long enough to see Meadow exit the barn with relaxed posture, chat with Dennis about something that makes them both smile, head toward the equipment shed together. Long enough to see Nell finish feeding chickens and jog back toward the house instead of collapsing from exhaustion. Long enough to know the structure I forced on this family has taken permanent root. I return to my car quietly, drive away from Ashford Farm as sunrise paints the sky pink and gold. The contracts protect Meadow now. The ownership stake gives her veto power. The salary proves her value in language. Constance understands dollars, not devotion. I'm no longer needed there. The drive home gives me time to think about what mothers actually leave their children. Not trust funds or property deeds, though I have those too. The real inheritance is readiness, the capacity to deploy everything when protection is required. 35 years of teaching mathematics wasn't wasted time. It was preparation. Building the skills, resources, and strategic thinking that let me wage 3 months of calculated warfare when my daughter-in-law needed salvation and couldn't save herself. Every year of frugal living and disciplined saving existed for one perfect deployment. Every lesson plan teaching probability trained the brain that outmaneuvered Constance's manipulation. Every parent-teacher conference navigating difficult personalities prepared me for psychological combat disguised as family intervention. Silent strength across a lifetime isn't passivity. It's patience to gather resources before the war you can't yet see coming. Mothers don't leave fortunes. They leave the courage to spend everything protecting what matters. I pull into my driveway as sun clears the horizon. Same light that now shines on a farm where women work as equals and children learn dignity. 35 years of teaching mathematics taught me this: every variable has value. Every equation balances. And sometimes the quiet preparation of a lifetime exists for one perfect moment of deployment. Mission complete. Legacy delivered. Time to tend my garden. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when someone you care about is being destroyed. For 3 months, I watched Meadow suffer before I acted. That's my regret. I should have intervened the moment I saw her shaking hands in that milking barn at dawn. Don't make my mistake. If you see someone trapped in family drama, especially someone being exploited by people who should protect them, don't wait for it to get worse. Move strategically, but move. What I learned from this revenge story is that justice doesn't always look like courtrooms and judges. Sometimes it looks like a retired teacher with a checkbook and 35 years of savings, willing to spend every penny to free someone she loves. I believe God gave me those resources not just for comfortable retirement, but for moments when protection requires power. The lesson from my revenge story isn't about vengeance, it's about leverage. When drama family situations turn into exploitation, you need more than love. You need structure, contracts, and the courage to use your strength when family drama threatens to destroy someone innocent. If this revenge story made you think about your own experiences with drama family situations or how you'd handle injustice, please leave a comment below. Tell me, would you have done what I did? Would you spend your life savings to save someone from family exploitation? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more true stories about standing up for what's right, subscribe to this channel. There's always another lesson to learn. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention mean everything to me. One final note. While this story contains fictionalized elements added for storytelling and reflection purposes, the core message about protecting vulnerable family members from exploitation is very real. Take care of each other, and may God bless you.